New York Times invites teenagers to write miniature memoirs from meaningful moments in their lives. This year, they received almost 13,000 entries from teenagers around the world, of which they announced 15 winners, 31 runners-up, and 56 honorable mentions. 8th to 9th grade transition. The class of 2028 will enter BHS this September. The PSB is gearing up to facilitate a smooth transition for 8th graders into 9th grade. Starting this month, 8th grade students will select their courses for 9th grade. This includes recommendations from current educators in the core academic classes, English, Math, Science, Social Studies, and World Languages, and preferences for elective courses such as career and technology education, performing arts, and visual arts. Students and families will receive support from both current 8th grade teams and from BHS faculty, staff, and administration. The 8th to 9th grade transition events. As part of the transition process, BHS has organized a series of informational events about the school's academic and student support programs, as well as the many opportunities available to students. And you see the schedule here, February 6th, so some events have already occurred in the past. The 9th through the 5th is the World Language Roadshow. February 15th is Arts at BHS. March 4th is Life at BHS. And then March 14th is an introduction to athletics. This year we've had a couple of Lunar New Year celebrations. Driscoll School held their annual event today. This is the year of the dragon, and you see a few shots of Driscoll's event today or this morning. And it was a jammed-packed session for all of those there enjoying the presentation. Then Baker School also hosted a Lunar New Year celebration. And again, you can see a jammed-packed gymnasium with various student performances, as well as parents of students also participated in the event as well. And that concludes our Spotlight on Excellence, and we're going to turn our attention to that concludes our Superintendent's Update, and now we're going to turn our attention to the Spotlight on Excellence. We shine the Spotlight on Excellence this evening on the BHS TV production program. BHS TV is a project-based learning at its best, where students get to work in a professional setting on fully collaborative projects that leverage their unique skills and passions. Building on their real-world skills, students apply for different jobs on each project: writer, director, editor, sound engineer, continuity monitor, set costume prop designer, graphics designer, music production, news producer, broadcast technician, actor, anchor, and reporter. Students are responsible for taking a leadership role on their part in the production while being accountable for showing up and supporting others as needed. This course has been newly relaunched this year by visual arts educator Anna Mary Lavassier, who has revitalized the program through leveraging partnerships with the film and TV production community. We are happy to have BHS with us tonight. And at this time, I'm going to turn the mic over to Ms. Lavassier to share with us this important production. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, and then you let me know when you want me to reshare.
Okay,
right.
You can put it up on the first slide, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah. Good evening, school committee. I'm Anna Mary Lavassier, and I have with me Josie Marquise and Romy Frastai, who are two of my students from last semester. I'm gonna let them actually talk about the two projects that we did. So if you want to put it on the next slide, please. Okay, go ahead, Josie.
Hi, I'm Josie. I was the director of Avery Point. We came up as a group with the idea, like the plot line, and then based on jobs, like screenwriters wrote it, like I directed it. We had actors like that acted. Yeah, we like shot it all ourselves, planned it out. Yeah. That was, yeah.
And then we have some candid shots on the next slide of us in filming. It was all filmed at BHS in our education studio, and with equipment in collaboration with Big. And then Romy, do you want to talk about the morning show?
Sure. Okay, so the morning show, we kind of got the chance to just be a part of like this miniature news show and just experience what it's like to be like on live television. Um, we basically each person was responsible for their own part. So me, for example, I was a news anchor. With there were two other news anchors, and our responsibility was to write a script for ourselves. And then we were gonna go live. There was a point where we were gonna go live. We had rehearsals, but at the end of the day, we just kind of put it all out there, and it was really, I don't know, it was really fun. It was a good experience and a good opportunity, I think. And yeah, there were also like a bunch of other jobs. There was a director, of course. There were people like behind the scenes who were each operating each camera and like making sure that like they were getting the correct angles at like at each moment. And it was just a really cool thing of like everyone coming together.
There's some shots of that on the next few slides. And that's behind the scenes. The morning show was filmed live this week, which means that we had cameras rolling and we didn't edit anything after we filmed. It just went up that afternoon. I was able to do a workshop this summer in collaboration and designed by Big, funded very generously by the Brookline Educational Fund and the Office for Teaching and Learning, where we learned how to use the control room that we have in our class. And it's kind of the perfect subject matter for project-based learning. Like, how can you teach someone to use that control board without having them actually use the control board? So this is how we've set this up. We're hoping for more collaboration with Brookline Interactive Group. The long-term goal, aside from all of this, has been airing on Brookline Interactive Group or local cable access through Brookline Interactive Group. And a long-term goal that we have for the class as it grows is that hopefully at some point we will have a fully student-run channel where students are making all of the content and programming. That's the goal. Other questions? Oh yes, and if you missed the screening, it's going to be screening again this weekend on Saturday and Sunday at 10 a.m. on your local cable access.
So is it actually on Big, or do you have your own YouTube channel for anyone who,
This YouTube channel link is for our own. I also teach digital video, so we have a YouTube channel for those two classes. And then it also runs through Big on their channel as well.
So is there a link that we could use to see it if we?
Yes, so there's that QR code brings you right to our YouTube channel, to the playlist, and you can watch any of the digital video or the TV production work that we've made so far. And episode 2, we've just started our second semester, so I have a whole new group of students. And episode 2 of Avery Point should be coming out April break.
for anyone who it's not QR code savvy or just wants to know, it's the YouTube, or the YouTube name is BHS Blue Lab, all one word. Did I get that right?
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yep. Just reading it into the record.
I assume it's going to go in the superintendent's report too, so we'll be able to see that. This is, can I say something?
Go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you. This is really exciting for me because I remember when Big took over. Big is our local access TV here in Brookline, and I remember when they took over the 4th floor, and I was concerned that we weren't going to be using it enough. And
Getting used.
I'm really pleased to hear that we are actually using it for programming and for classes, and it's really exciting. So thank you for all the work that all of you have done.
Mariah?
Thanks. So could you just remind me, what's the name of the class and how long has it been running? I missed that.
So the class that these two were in was TV production, and this is my second year at Brookline High. I know that it was running previously under Tato Mosa. This is the first time that I have run it. It hasn't been up, I think, since before COVID, and we're trying to kind of rebuild it and make it bigger and better and bigger, because big.
And one question I have is, I love the idea of this, like your vision of the student channel or how to, and I'm just wondering if there's, if you're weaving in at all opportunities for sort of, I don't know, how bring your own device TV production, or how students, given that almost everyone can be a digital media producer in some ways, I'm just curious if that's something that has ever crossed your mind to incorporate some of that. And no is a totally okay answer. Yeah.
If we can get the student channel up and running, which is something that we're working on again with Big, then the plan is that like Brainwave would be on there, which is fully student done. That's their student variety show that is done through Big. We have a lot of students who film outside of the classroom on their own devices, ads or PSAs, that kind of thing. So those would run on the channel. Yeah, I'm hoping that it becomes this big thing, and definitely opportunities for kids to use their own devices.
Thank you. It's so great.
Yeah.
Congrats, and congrats to the two of you for the work. It's exciting, and I'm looking forward to see the episodes later.
So with that, the Public Schools of Brookline Spotlight on Excellence is awarded to Brookline High School TV Production Program. In recognition of the BHS TV Production Program, which provides our students the opportunity to work in a professional setting on fully collaborative projects that leverage the unique skills and passions of every student. Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for coming and presenting. Very exciting, and we look forward to more, and I'm sure that all of us will be watching what you've produced. And with that, are there any questions regarding the superintendent's update? Stephen.
I just want to follow up on last week's question about affinity spaces at BHS. Have you had a chance to?
Actually, BHS is here tonight. That would be a great question for them.
Oh, hi, BHS. I want to know if the affinity spaces have been reintroduced for Jewish and Muslim students. Do you want to just grab a mic so those online can hear? Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Hal Mason. We're beginning the advisory affinity space for Jewish and Israeli students next Wednesday. There was very little interest in the Muslim students, so we're looking at an alternative type of space for them to join in affinity. Yep.
All right, anyone else? Okay, then we'll move into public comment. And first up, Mr. Elliot Wayne.
I come as a concerned parent, really, with the curriculum in this town. There's a lot of things that are really just, they're upsetting to certain parents, maybe. Maybe a lot of them don't care or don't really follow their kids' work. My kid is a freshman at BHS, and there's some things that, you know, overall, school is amazing in a lot of ways. It's like a college, the opportunities, the classes. It's the curriculum and where we look at the world in identity and intersectionality and oppressor and oppressed and the disdain for Western culture and Western ideas. And it's infected the curriculum. We know it's affected America. We see it on our college campuses, things they're protesting for. You know, we see what this equity, diversity, inclusion has led to, okay? I have my issues with it, but it's not the time or place right now. But I'm gonna give you some of my concerns about the curriculum, okay? BHS is here about affinity spaces. It ties into, everything is for this group or that group. But we're all just residents of Brookline. We're all here to learn, we're all here to be, and everybody sees color or race or gender, okay, in everything. Not in the things that it matters, but in everything. We see it in everything and everywhere, and it's in our curriculum. And I'm just going to give you a few brief examples. I know I don't have much time, and I didn't really prepare. But, you know, we talked a lot about Israeli and Jewish stuff the last couple months. And I think a week or two ago, it was International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And what did it get? An email from an Anthony Meyer on a Sunday night. There was no mention in school. My son's a freshman. How come he's never read the Diary of Anne Frank? I mean, what kind of school system are we? He never read it in peer school because there was some bias against it with his teachers. We haven't addressed it, okay? And he's in this pilot de-leveled responding to literature humanities, which some things are good, some things not so good. I lost my train of thought there. Oh, and what is he reading? You know, because they read different books for different, different groups. There's these kids here who take the easiest, then there's the kids who take the middle, and then the kids who are on the advanced. So my son is in English. He took the easiest because he struggles with reading more than other subjects. And what are the last two books he's got? One is about, and I'm not racist and I'm not offensive, but the first book was about a gay Asian Chinese kid. And the next one was a gay Vietnamese kid. So one, I understand. Two, it seems a little much to me. Where's To Kill a Mockingbird? Or Anne Frank? And I'll end quickly with social studies. I mean, I don't know what we're teaching the kids, okay? We ancient Chinese history, ancient Indian history. I understand those have a time and place, but where's ancient Greek history? Where's the things that shape the culture that we live in today? The Greeks who taught us theater and democracy and philosophy and history, okay? But we don't teach that. We teach ancient Chinese history or African kingdoms. So I'm sorry if that comes across maybe inappropriate, but it's true. We live in a Western society, okay? The Greeks and the Romans and the Jews and the Christians, they formed who we are in America today. You see it in our architecture, in our art, in our ideas. And yet the trend is to tear up everything Western and get rid of it. And I wish I had more time, and I wish there was a forum where concerned parents like me could talk to real people, because I understand this is not, you can't have it dialogue in this, but there are a lot of things that concern parents. Maybe I'm different because I sit with my kid every night and I look at all his homework, okay? So when you guys talk about equity and people have more advantages than other, you know, not everything is structural racism. I sit with my kid every night, and I bet there's a lot of parents out of the 500 freshman kids who don't. So I see what's taught. I see what could be improved. I see what is really good. Not everything is bad, but this is bad. And I would love to address it further, and thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wayne. Next, we have Mr. Arthur Conquest.
Good evening, everyone. Don't start my 3 minutes yet, please. I just want to publicly thank the superintendent and the chair for keeping my weight at 150 pounds, okay? I walk every morning in the high school. I don't do it in the afternoon, but I go outside. But I do in the morning at 6:30, 6 o'clock when it's dark out. And I just want to thank you for that, okay, publicly. Thank you. Arthur Conquest, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 6. Monday past, I attended the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Justice Subcommittee meeting, which amounted to an embarrassing and insulting joke from my perspective. Rewind the calendar to the 17th of March, 2022, when I attended a Brookline High School African American and Latino American scholars organized demonstration that easily had between 1,250 and 1,300 students, faculty, and administrators in attendance on Greeno Street between Davis Ave and Tappan Street to protest racist behavior by white BHS administrators. I interviewed, say, 10 Black and Latino students and a few of their parents. It was my understanding from a follow-up meeting and discussion with a member of the school committee that this diversity and justice subcommittee would be addressing some of the issues raised by the 17th of March 2022 student walkout demonstration. I've conducted 4.5 exit interviews with Black senior female administrators from the school department who have resigned over, say, the past 4 years. Where is the Black community input with the Diversity, Inclusion, and Justice Subcommittee? The report that was made by 2 white interlopers in the community who view themselves as spokespersons for Black people, no names mentioned, was completely senseless, having no bearing whatsoever on the 12th of March 2022 demonstration. It's pure, unadulterated evil, what is taking place. Apartheid light, with you wanting Black people to have, and I quote, nice temperament, and allow Black children to be systematically destroyed as they are being assigned to basic and standard classes, while white and Asian students are sent to honors and advanced placement classes. This has been the Brookline School Department's policy for going now on half a century. You must stop immediately this systematic and miseducation that's destroying Black and Latino children and keeping Black and the Latino community intentionally removed from participating in the democratic process. Stop treating us as inferiors and stupid. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Conquest III. And we will now go to Ms. Celine Selim.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can, yes, go right ahead.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. Thank you so much for your commitment to our schools and for being here tonight. I am the parent of a current BHS student in 10th grade, one in elementary school at Hayes, and 2 who graduated a few years ago. One of the reasons my older children had such a great experience at BHS was the different levels that really enabled them to learn at the right level for each of them and feel adequately challenged. We are deeply concerned by the plan to remove levels in ELA in 9th grade. We strongly believe that having levels is important to meet the needs of all students and to maintain the strong reputation of BHS. If levels are removed, many parents will seriously consider removing their children from BHS in favor of leaving the school district for other towns or private schools. It is important for all of us and for the town that our schools maintain the reputation they've always had and deserved. It is important that the public have confidence in the public schools. The decision to delevel a class should be taken after receiving some public input from the parents of the student. Also, having one level could overburden the teachers as they try to navigate students' different needs in the same class. We need to have quantitative and comprehensive evaluation done before any more decisions on the matter are made. And I'm respectfully asking you to consider not passing further change into 9th grade ELA. I think the pilot ELA sounds intriguing, and I don't doubt it is working for some or many students. I hope it is working for teachers too, but it is too soon to eliminate standard and honors. I hope you will please continue to offer all three until we have more information. I also ask that you keep the public well up to date on any further plans to delevel math and science. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Selim. We will now go to Ms. Deborah Beatron.
Hello? Am I heard?
We can hear you, yes?
Okay, all right, sorry. Okay. Hi, good evening. My name is Devor Betran, and I'm the mother of a rising ninth grader and current 11th grader at BHS. I speak on behalf of a lot of parents who are concerned about some aspects of the Reimagining Ninth Grade initiative. While we fully support the need for critical equity and access for all students, many of us are wondering where the data is that shows that deleveling is achieving its intended outcomes. Are more students going into honors history after having taken WISP, for example? Students that might not have otherwise? Are there other schools where data shows how deleveling was successful using the metrics that were defined when the program was implemented? Do we even know what possible negative impacts might be? As of now, we have not really seen this type of data being presented. The decision to offer only a deleveled ELA class for next year has been made, but I urge the administration to reconsider and continue offering the pilot until there is sufficient data to evaluate the program. With regards to math and science, we want to make sure that in our already crowded high school classrooms, it will be possible to differentiate the math and science curriculum in a way that works for all learners. What is also worrisome is that BHS is embarking on an experiment that would be the first of its kind in physics. We ask just that you do this carefully, methodically, and with the right data. Finally, I just want to mention I am the daughter of an Ethiopian father who came to this country in the late 1950s and had to overcome many experiences with very overt racism. I deeply appreciate the need for equity. My father succeeded in this country through educational opportunities. I just ask that you please take a pause to evaluate this initiative to make sure that we are not creating new problems while trying to fix other ones. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Beatran. Now we will move to Mr. Andrew Koifman.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can, yes. Go right ahead.
My name is Andrew Koifman. I'm speaking here today at the recommendation from Mr. Ehrenberg to contribute to the Deleveling conversation. I'm a parent of 4 children currently enrolled in the Brookline system. One of them is at the high school and has experienced the deleveled social studies course. I typically try not to get too involved in my son's classes, but I think his perspective on deleveling is important. What he told me is that while some projects in social studies are interesting, there are very few opportunities to take on additional challenges. To be fair, knowing my son, I'm not sure that he would take on an additional challenge if it wasn't required by the class either. But overall, his perspective is that the class is far too easy. He said, and I quote him here, "It's like having a free period." Now, that's anecdotal evidence. What concerns me, just like some of the other speakers you heard before me, is that we have no real evidence of successes of deleveling at Brookline. I am looking forward to hearing more about it today, but what I read in Brookline News article on February 6th doesn't show progress in improving representation of Black and Hispanic students in honors classes. What the article said is that the 9th grade standard level Black and Hispanic students are overrepresented by 7 or 8 points respectively in the standard level courses. For 10th grade social studies, this number is significantly worse at 11 and 12 points respectively. As I said, I'd like to hear more about what's being proposed, but I would ask the school committee to hold off on removing leveled classes from the curriculum until we actually have quantitative evidence that these changes are actually delivering the results that are expected. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Koifman. Next, we will go to Mr. Michael Chechelnitsky.
Hello. Hi, can you hear me?
We can, yes, go right ahead.
Yes, good evening. Thanks for the opportunity. My name is Michael Chichelnitsky. My son is in the 9th grade at BHS. My daughter is in the 5th grade. I'd like to reiterate the request for a pause to properly assess and reflect on current experience with the new initiative. I'd like to understand what the key objectives really are and whether modification is really, the changes are really achieving them. I think understanding this will have to take time. The classes are year-long classes, and we need to see how students that are taking them progress through high school to really see the impact. I think real feedback from students and teachers is crucial, and I'm looking forward to seeing that over time. I'd like to continue seeing the 9th graders entering in the next few years have the choice that they have today, the standard and honors, or choosing choosing an ALA, the level class. And I think providing these opportunities will keep the students as engaged and as motivated as possible, which I think is crucial to success and reputation of BHS. In addition, I am having a PhD on the crossroads of applied math and physics, climate change. I firmly believe that teaching and learning math and science is quite different from teaching and learning humanities and social sciences. I have a degree in English as well. I think we definitely need a lot of information and deliberation before we make significant changes to what is now a strong and successful STEM program. And I don't think Deleveling math and physics in the 9th grade should be done anytime soon until we really understand how it's working in the humanities. I'm going to conclude by reading from the last paragraph of the letter to the editors of the Cypress from the 15th of this year. Please let students enjoy the breadth and the depth of what this school can offer. Please celebrate the differences and our diversity by letting everyone pursue their own self-perceived notion of the idea of a good education. Please do not delevel classes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chechelnitsky. We will now go to Ms. Carolyn Thal.
Good evening, school committee. I actually was coming on to address this issue that a bunch of other people have already addressed. I didn't realize there would be so much commentary on it, maybe due to the Brookline.news article. I've communicated with some of you about this issue in the past couple of months. See it on your agenda this evening, which is 9th grade courses. I am always interested in looking at issues of importance to PSB. I want to be clear that my thoughts here are not directed at any individual. I understand this is a complex organization with many moving pieces and many hardworking people. Maybe because PSB is such a large organization, it seems like the decision to fully de-level 9th grade ELA next year transpired, but without robust enough input for such a consequential decision, meaning community input and data, and perhaps a necessary vote by this committee. I respect that staff have been working on this since pre-COVID, and I respect the intention, but it feels hasty to community members who, unlike dorky me, don't watch school committee meetings to try to stay fully informed and rather suddenly realize that a pretty fundamental shift was taking place at the high school. Everybody wants to do what they believe they can do to help as many of our students as possible to achieve their highest potential. De-leveling might be one approach to that goal. The literature and experiences of peer districts is mixed. On paper, I can see how de-leveling makes sense as a way to encourage more participation in honors, advanced, and AP courses in 10th through 12th grade. I have a friend who's a Brookline resident and works in the Boston schools. Her kids went to our K-8s. She's very close with a teacher at BHS who's been instrumental in advocating for de-leveling. And my friend has vigorously promoted the concept to me in our conversations. Notably, she has a 9th grader who she moved out of PSB to Milton Academy this year, and a 6th grader she moved to Beaver. So that does not appear to be an endorsement of what she observed and anticipated for real educational life as opposed to in theory. Along with theoretical hopes for what deleveling might achieve, it's also easy to identify potential downsides and unintended consequences. The bottom line seems to be we don't yet know whether this initiative is having the intended impact at BHS, and it appears that many community members feel uninformed. So at this point, I respectfully suggest and request that the district continue 9th grade next year, just as it is this year. Keep running the unleveled ELA alongside the standard and honors, treat it as a true pilot with a data-driven evaluation, and keep looking at the identified metrics to see if WISP 4 years in is having the desired effect of increasing participation in higher level courses. And school committee, I would ask that you please consider, amongst all of the other work that you do, reviving past practice of engaging with the community through Q&A sessions or other more direct means than Thursday nights. We know you're all so taxed, but I think that people are eager to participate if they are asked. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Thal. Next, we will go to Ms. Claire McClintock.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
We can, yes.
Okay, great. My name is Claire McClintock, and I currently have one child in BEEP and one child in kindergarten. I'm also the stepmother of a BHS sophomore. And from a somewhat outsider's perspective, because my children are so young, I just want to remind you all about the wonderful reputation that Brookline High School has. And whenever I speak with my stepson, his friends, or alums who are the alumni who are, my age or older, everyone talks about how wonderful all the choices are at Brookline High School. That's always been, one of the points that is driven home over and over again. And so I, like many of the other speakers, would just urge the school committee to continue to allow those choices and so allow people to choose the D-leveled ELA class or choose the regular or honors ELA class, because I think the incredible curriculum that Brookline High School has is very important for its fabulous reputation. And I hope that this beautiful girl right next to me will one day be a student there. And so I hope she has the ability to make the choices that are best for her at the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McClintock, and thank you to your daughter. We will now go to Mr. Logan Poter.
Yo,
Good evening. Can you guys all hear me?
We can. Go right ahead.
Can't start a Zoom meeting without asking that question. Thank you, members of the school board, for letting me speak tonight. My name is Logan Poter, and my wife and 3 boys and I live in the Runkle-Driscoll buffer. Well, my family is just starting their education journey within PSB, my oldest being a kindergartner, my middle child, being in BEEP. I hope my comments echo the passion you've heard from my fellow speakers tonight. When my family and I relocated to Boston 1.5 years ago, we chose Brookline for multiple reasons, but the main draw was the strength of the school system, because we all know it cannot surely be the roads. All jokes aside, I'm here to speak on the topic of de-leveling in our high school beginning in the 9th grade. I'm passionate about protecting the academic excellence within PSB, and I'm concerned that de-leveling doesn't solve the problem of diversity in our honors program. I'm concerned because I do not feel the data has been presented that shows this is a solution to that problem. To my awareness, there's been a high school newspaper article on the topic, Minutes from a school committee meeting whereby an upper class high school student spoke about her experience in a Brookline news article that was released this week. I don't feel there's sufficient evidence to support such a change in the curriculum. And further, I think you'll find evidence from around the country that provides counter opinion to this proposed change. Now, I agree that we've identified an issue within the honors program, but I do not agree that the proposed Deleveling plan solves that problem. We're identifying this problem in the 9th grade, but it's not as if these students go through an entire year of 9th grade curriculum before getting placed in 9th grade classes. They've had an entire K through 8 education path prior to entering high school. Meaning, are we sure we're looking in the right place? My understanding is that this district is in the process of standardizing the middle school curriculum, which I think is a great place to focus. Layering on another curriculum change muddies the results of the middle school standardization efforts. While not an educator, in my experience, problem-solving methodology is known as DMAIC or the PDCA approach, which I'll walk through, right? Plan, we identify a problem and plan a course of action. Do, we implement that change. Check, we assess how that change impacted the problem. Act, and we change our course of action or full steam ahead on the tested solution. As I said earlier, I agree we've identified a problem, but feel we're trying to implement many different changes without seeing how any one of those on their own play out, namely the middle school standardization, which is upstream from the 9th grade issue. In closing, I ask that you pause any further leveling in the high school until more credible evidence is presented to the public and until we are able to measure the impact of the middle school standardization efforts. Diversity lifts all boats, and it's critical that we get the solution to this problem right. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Poter, and thank you to everyone who participated in public comment this evening. That concludes public comment for today. And we will now move to presentations and discussions of current issues. And first up will be a discussion and possible vote on the superintendent's FY 2025 initial budget request.
Good evening. Can you hear me? How about now? Is that good? Okay. We'll get started, and I know we've got 45 minutes. Let's see how we do. So tonight, we have a few more topics to cover. We're going to start with an update from the town school partnership. We had a meeting on Tuesday, and the town shared some updated information regarding revenue and expenses. And so if you can move to the first slide. I figured it would be helpful, at least to no one else me, but I also know that there's a few members on the school committee that perhaps were not involved in the process last year when a 3-year override was passed. So there's numbers that are flying around, and I've been trying to understand and make sense of them and put them in some kind of an order that I can track. And so I've attempted to do a little bit of that tonight. When you move forward with an override for 3 years, the estimated budget projection, thank you very much, that's helpful. The estimated budget projection for FY 25 was $137,101, $137,101,490. So that number was estimated, and of course, you know, we're not clairvoyant. You know, there's going to be things that crop up that you couldn't anticipate. But the number that was used as you moved forward through your process last year for this year was that number. And I'm mentioning that number because if you go to, because I want to ground you in subsequent numbers. So when the town prepared an estimate, or I call this a thumbnail, of what the budget would look like for the town and the school back in December, they provided this document here. And on that, you'll see the school number is 137 137,701,000. And so it was a little bit different. My interpretation was that, they were giving you credit for some potential growth because at the time you wouldn't have known what your estimated growth was for the year. So I assumed that you had your override number, and then in addition to that, you would be getting some growth. But subsequently, I learned that the town had taken the 137,100,000 and added 600,000 to it because there was they were trying to make up for a shortfall that the town had on their side, but that wasn't clear at the time, and it took several meetings. Actually, Helen and Mariah and I have been meeting almost weekly since this document came out. Yes, sometimes trying to really understand what these numbers are, what do they mean to us, and so when we created the budget on the school side, we were attempting to balance to this $137,700,000 number. And as you know, our proposal came in higher than that. So we've been talking about having to reduce our expenditure side by about a little south of $1 million. But as we all know, there's expenses, and then we have to have enough revenue in order to be able to support those dollars. And so when we met with them this week, they gave us an updated revenue estimate. And so what I did, if you can go to the next document, and you have these documents, I took the information that we'd received in December, and then I tried to align it with the information that we received earlier this week. The information we received earlier this week was in a different format and didn't have all of the same lines. So I had to do a little bit of ticking and tying in order to get a comparison, because for me, I like to understand what improved for revenue and maybe what did not trend the way they had hoped for, so was less. So what this document does is it shows you the change between what they shared with us in December and what they're expecting at this point in time. So in short, revenues are higher by almost $3 million than what the number was in December. And you can see it's up or down in a few different categories. We didn't spend a tremendous amount of time talking about, some of the details of that, but in short, when the governor's budget comes out, we have the state aid numbers. So that adjustment on the state aid line is a direct result of the information we received from the governor's budget. So $3 million more, that's good. Makes us all happy. But then when you go on the expense side, you'll also see changes. So you see our budget that came in at $138,600,000. And then you see all of these other lines that appear on the town side of the budget. What I've done here is based on our meetings, and certainly Mariah and Helen, if I haven't gotten this right, please do speak up. But based on my notes and understanding, the items that are listed that are in blue text, those are items that they call expenses that are above the line. So what does that mean, above the line? Above the line means that in Brookline, you take revenue, your gross revenue, and then there's certain expenses that are taken off the top to come to this net revenue number. And then you hear this term that there is a split in the revenue from there, which means that this,
Susan,
yes.
Can I interrupt you with just a clarification question?
Sure.
These forecast numbers, where were they generated from? From what period were they generated? When I'm looking at the 138.6, where does that number come from?
That's the budget that we
The current budget.
The current, yes.
So
The initial proposal.
the initial proposal, which is not reflected on this first page.
No, the first one was last year's
Last year's projections.
projection. I think that was in the spring.
So
I
this
believe that in the
page,
spring.
this page is our most up-to-date forecasted projections.
Correct.
Thank you.
And all I've done here, Steve, is I've taken what the town gave us in December at the beginning of their process, and I've added to it the most recent information received from the town. So the document you're looking at now are really all town numbers, except for I've added our budget proposal of 138.
And the 138.6 was the amount that was $1 million over as of last week from
Correct.
what we projected the town
Yes.
would allocate to us. Okay.
That's what we've been working with.
Please continue,
Exactly.
sorry.
Yep, nope. And so one of the things, so the number that we've been focused on is the 138, and how are we going to get that in line with what the town allocation is? And so what you see here is that there's expenses that we haven't been including in our conversation that really does impact how much money is available and accessible to us. So I don't want to go too much of a deep dive, but I did want to share it with you, and then we can talk about this moving forward. But it's my best and most simplest way to present some of these concepts that I've been trying myself to understand, and putting things in a format in a consistent way so that we can begin to track what changes are and how they impact us. So the blue text represents what's above the line, which means that you have your gross revenue, and anything in the blue text is subtracted out. And then what's left over in revenue is then divvied up between the school and the town. And the split of revenue that's available to us is 59% goes to the school and 41% is then available to the town. Okay, so what you'll see at the very bottom here is information about what the revenue deficit is. So what does that mean? That means that we're short revenue across the town. We don't have enough revenue to support all of the expenses that are currently sitting in the budget proposals. And so in addition to having being a little over on our expenditure side, there's not enough revenues to support the amount of money that you had even anticipated last year would be available to you. Okay? So the last one is the actual document we received. I hope this is helpful.
One more
Sure,
clarification.
absolutely.
So revenue went up 3 million, assuming, which we can't, I know, assuming there was 60-40 split, the amount that we projected over our last year's projection is less than 60% of that 3 million, though. Correct? Like our budget increased from last year's projection, according to this page, by 941,000.
Correct.
Which is less than 60% of the increase in revenues. So the share of the revenue increase that we're projecting to claim is smaller than the 60-40 split that we would otherwise have claimed. Do you understand what I'm saying, Mariah? Or am I?
I don't want to take, if you want to answer the question, that's fine, but I do understand what he's saying and happy to answer.
Okay.
You want me to answer it?
Yes.
Okay, the thing that I think you're missing, Stephen, is that yes, the 3 million, it went up by $3 million, but the other thing is that the expenditures also go up, and many of the expenditures that went up are these ones that she described as the blue ones, the above the line, and so they take more away, even though the revenue increased.
They fetch indirect rates?
Those ones first take the pie, and so we end up still with less than we want, even though there's an additional 3 million, there's more in above the line. There's more than $3 million in increased above the line expenses. So if you see at the top,
I see.
It says 2.9 million additional revenue, but there's 3.1 million.
Thank you, Mariah.
Yeah.
That clears it up.
Yeah. So we're upside down. Okay. Okay, and then the last, and we can spend some more time trying to understand. Some people that have been here, like Mariah, longer, have a master's degree in this. Others of us try to boil it down to maybe a high school level understanding of it.
Sadly, it feels like every day is the first day. So
I get it. I get it.
This is a great explanation. Thank you.
Yeah. So on the last document, and this is, I think, really, I felt it was important to walk up to this information here because again, it's a different format than the information we've been using as we've been digesting the impact of revenue and expense on our budget proposal for this year. So what this document here is again, another town document. And so this runs this revenue projection through this town-school partnership split. And I'm not going to give a lengthy explanation about the formula, but what I want to share with you is that the items that are listed here under fixed costs, you also saw in the last document, they were the blue items, okay? But I felt like if I didn't put it in the other format, this would be hanging out there without an understanding of how does that relate to our budget. So here, what you'll see, again, are changes in some of the expenses on the town side. And because those expenses have changed, overall, and they're taken off the top, it leaves less revenue available to us and the town as well. So if you look in the area down towards the bottom where it's highlighted in yellow, the revised allocation that's available to us to cover our expenses is $136,413,000. Okay, so that's loss of revenue and our expenses being higher, the combination thereof. If you look to the right, our school budget is $138.6 million, and this revenue allocated to us is $136,400,000. Okay, so the difference between the two is $2.2 million. So I just wanted to be clear about that, and when you take your vote tonight, you're going to see these numbers, and I wanted you to understand where those numbers are coming from. Okay, so that's the update. That's where we're at. Now there'll be another iteration of this. So in the beginning of March, they'll get additional information about the GIC, and then these numbers will be refined again. And if the GIC comes in lower, that means that's more money that gets freed up to be allocated between the two parties, the town and the school. So that could be favorable. Likewise, if the GIC money comes in, or the rate comes in higher than the 10% that's being projected right now, then it means that there's even less revenue that will be available in the long run. But this is the information we have at this time, and we'll be giving you an update after the town receives the GIC information in the beginning of March. Okay? All right, so up tonight, the next item is grants, and I'm not going to review grants with you per se, but I did provide in your packet, and it's up on the website now, under the special revenue section, the grants. There's 11 recurring grants that are used to supplement and are intimately connected to our educational plan. And we learned that last week when the grant is going to be funding the ELA professional development for that curriculum, right? So without these grants, we still need staff and instructional materials that are essential to our programming. And so this gives you an accounting of an FY25 where our grant money is currently allocated. Now, of course, these aren't hard numbers yet. You know, we'll go through the grant cycle after you have approved your budget, but we're expecting, at least for the most part, that we'll have similar grant revenue next year, with the exception of, I think, Title I, which we were notified that we would be receiving less money next year than we are this year. But aside from that, you'll see that they're pretty much level because that's the best information that we have. Okay, so the next item on our agenda that you've all been waiting so patiently for is a presentation from the high school. Yes, absolutely.
45 minutes, right? So
yeah, and I know that one. Not for me.
I just wanted to make a comment. I wanted first off to thank you for the presentation. I think it's really nice the way you walked through all the different disparate sources of information. So thank you very much for the presentation. It's really helpful. I appreciate that. The one thing I wanted to call out for members in the public that you didn't talk about, but we talked about extensively, or I talked about extensively at Town School Partnership yesterday. I don't know when that was, Monday, this week. Okay, thank you. And I just want to flag that if you look in the middle of this last sheet that Susan gave us, there's a school assessment for fixed costs, and the top one there is negative a little over $1 million. And it says for building, IT, munis, payroll, general insurance. And if you look down below, that call out box underneath breaks down where that's coming from. And the vast majority, almost $20,000 is coming from essentially utilities. Mostly that's utilities. I think 830 something thousand of that is utilities. And I just want to flag for the committee that I think it would be very beneficial if we were to revisit, or perhaps Helen and the Capital Subcommittee directs Charlie to revisit some of the policies around how we heat and cool buildings. I think that, you know, we have strived, and I understand why, for sort of how we set the buildings, but I think that we need to rethink about this because these costs are huge and they're going to keep growing. And these expenses come at the expense of the educational program. And I think that we need to really carefully examine that trade-off and see how we can minimize this. Now, this particular number I want to flag, the huge increase was due to the budget being underfunded in prior years, which meant that now that the town has essentially improved its forecasting, as opposed to, we've run deficit for multiple years in the past couple of years, and now this is really trying to get us up to the most accurate number possible. Nonetheless, it reflects a tremendous cut to our budget. You can see that $830,000 is essentially a third of the deficit we're looking at right now, and as we all know, it's just a lot of money. So, you know, whatever we can be doing to think about how some of these costs can be adjusted, I would just urge us as a committee to support staff as they reevaluate this. It's not actually shown here. It's in a different breakout, but the 917 is some of the building department staff salary increases, and the balance of it, the 830 and change, is just utilities increases. And I just want to mention that it doesn't reflect there's two costs of building and utilities, right? There's how many units of energy you use and the cost and the issue. They've done the analysis. It's not some sort of, like, currently we're not wasteful. We're not expecting all these things. It's really the per unit cost that is driving this change. It's not some, you know, poor behavior on the part of the schools or of the people who are running the schools. Nonetheless, it's an opportunity for us to see how we can save costs there. And so I just encourage us to look at that, because all of these things have, you know, there's opportunities here, and that can be one of the ones we think about.
So actually, at our next capital sub, one of the reasons that we postponed it is I wanted to make sure that we had time to talk about the utilities bills and all the other repair and maintenance items. I think all of us have seen our electricity bills go up using less electricity. And that's the biggest part of the problem. It's not our usage, it hasn't increased. I actually looked at some of the numbers that have been shared with us so far. But that's not to say we can't discuss it and see if there are opportunities for savings, because those are savings that help all of us.
Andy, go ahead.
You might have said this and I missed it. So what you've been talking about, is that above the line?
Yes.
Okay, so
they call-
because it
they
says a
refer-
school assessment for fixed costs.
Yeah.
So in what sense is it being assessed?
It's actually not above the line.
if
It's in the middle. They call it in the middle, but since it's lopped off the top, I'm calling it above the line. So what does that mean? It means that these are expenses. So this line of $1,023,000, right? That number there represents what is in town budgets that is ours. Okay, so in other words, as you know, with the town partnership, the facility maintenance and utilities is managed by Charlie and his team on our behalf. His budget that he's maintaining, that's allocated to the work they're doing for us, is what is appearing here. Okay, and included in that are things like the contributions that we make to Munis, which is the accounting system, IT, and I think the audit. I think those were the things. Payroll. And so those are all services. Yes, our paychecks come from the town of Brookline, and so there is a real expense there. So all of the town expenses that are truly school, not shared in that way, like that show up and they allocate back to us on our end of the year report, is this $1,023,000. Okay, so they call that in the middle, but since we don't have a say really in that so much, and it's really just assessed back against our revenue, I'm saying it's above the line because it's not part of our dialogue.
Thank you.
Stephen?
Are we being asked to vote tonight on a budget that's $2.2 million over the projection of what the town's going to give to us?
The way that so we're going to repeat the language used last year, which acknowledges the two numbers and says that over the course of the next several months that we'll continue to try to reconcile the difference.
What was the difference last year at this time when we voted?
Yeah. We didn't have the override at the time.
So we're not planning on
The
override.
initial number just last year we looked at for when we were in FY23 looking at, was on this sheet, and it's 4.85 million.
Right, but the difference is that we plan for the override to cover the difference for this year's budget, right? We're not planning for an override this year.
Right. But we don't, but you plan for an override, well, you hope for an override, but you can't assume an override. So
what's the difference? I guess if I was going to say in short, right, what's causing this? Part of it is that we've come in with a budget that's $1 billion higher than that initial amount of money that was moved forward last year for the override. So that's one piece of it. Million. Let me get right in front of the mic. Million. In addition to that, there's these expenses that are on our behalf that also go up, right? And then revenue has to cover the cost of all of it, whether it's ours, the above the line stuff, or the town departments. The revenue has to come in. And the revenue is not coming in at the level they expected. And some of the expenses on the town side are coming in higher than what was used in the model. For example, utilities. The utilities was not brought forward. And now we're all having to absorb the impact of that, $800,000, right? So when you look at the 2.2 million, it's made up of a variety of different components that collectively are causing us to be here. Not all that we have had, control over on the school side.
So I'm sorry, so the language behind this vote is what? What is typically in this motion?
So if you go two more slides. Oh, can
Or am I
just
getting
say
ahead of this
so-
presentation?
Yeah, you're getting ahead.
I'll be patient.
No, we still have the high school class size. That's why I said we have 45 minutes. The big, no, that's.
Go ahead, Helen.
That's why I'm trying to really, shuffle us through to get the high school staff that are here to talk about the questions you asked around 5, is 5 going to be sufficient to address the issue? I think that was one of them. There was a couple other questions you had. So they're here tonight to answer your questions on that.
Go ahead, Helen.
I just want to make sure that people understand this last box on the bottom. And when we talk about school assessments for fixed cost, the 1.1 million is just the increase. The actual costs are the ones of the 8 million in utilities, the info technology of 2 million. It's the cost of doing business. And so we have to, realize it's all of those, that's the cost, and the increase is what is difficult.
In most school districts, these ones that are in the middle, right? If we had our own, usually facilities are handled on the school side for the schools, right? So we would incur costs if we had the workers on our side, right? So it's not a matter of we would not have these costs if it wasn't for this partnership. It would just be these expenses would actually show up in our budget so we could see it clearly and we'd have control over it so that we could manage it accordingly. But we don't. It's showing up on the town side because of this partnership agreement that you've had for a long time. Yeah. So this is just like making people aware of how that works and where the various expenses that are affecting us are living. Other questions about that, or shall we bring Anthony up and have him answer some questions about high school class size? Okay. And the other two items for tonight, the vote, I don't think that'll take long, but who knows? And then contracted services. You never know.
She's starting to know us.
It gets worse.
Can you hear me okay? It works, really. Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Guillory. Thank you, Dr. Givens. Thank you, school committee members. I've led Hal to believe that we are the guest of honor this evening to talk with you. But more seriously, in talking with district leaders this week, we understand there is a need to define some staffing and budgetary terms that we use at Brookline High School. Specifically how teaching assignments work at the high school, what a fifth teaching assignment looks like for math, science, social studies, and world language, what many refer to as +1 assignments or 4+1 assignments, as well as co-teaching. Our understanding is that we're seeking, all of us, a common understanding of some choices we made for the 23-24 school year and their impact on class sizes. I don't know that in this time we can provide a full postmortem on where we're here, and so I just want to be transparent about that. I certainly think there's work for us to do as a team to understand that. I also believe that there were questions that were left unanswered after the joint finance and curriculum school committee meeting in late November, I think on the 28th. And so I regret that. I think we were ready to come and whether it to a joint committee or to the full school committee. So I'm glad to have the opportunity tonight. I just want to stop for a second and make sure that my understanding of our purpose for being here is in line with your understanding.
Can I just clarify something?
Sure.
My recollection is you went to curriculum and then you were going to come back for curriculum finance and you didn't come back. It got taken off the agenda, right? Because you said it was a joint curriculum finance, but I don't think you presented at joint curriculum finance, right? It was just.
Yes, we did.
Oh, you did?
We did. It was memorable.
That was a curriculum meeting. That wasn't a joint curriculum finance meeting.
It was, well.
How would I not be at a curriculum finance meeting? I wasn't out of town for the joint meeting. I was there and it wasn't what happened. The meeting you're talking about was a curriculum meeting and I wasn't there.
I believe you're correct. I think it was correct.
I heard about it. I heard about it. It was memorable. It was not a finance meeting.
Okay. I'm sorry. So, okay. Great. So what I want to do is turn to Hal for a moment. We'll be toggling back and forth to just talk about teaching assignments at the high school. Then we'll go through various pieces, knowing you're going to have questions. You go ahead, Evan.
So per the contract, teachers teach 20 instructional periods. For some subjects, that's 20 periods defined as 5 courses. For some subjects, it's 16 periods, 4 courses, with the 4 additional instructional periods being geared toward direct academic support. English is different. English has 16 instructional periods, 4 courses, in recognition of the extra work that's done by English teachers in individual writing conferences with students, which is another form of academic support. It's just not structured in the way that a tutorial class is, for example, or a learning center, or not a learning center, sorry, or a support center is structured. Instead, it's more of an individual type of conference that happens. But that decision, which was done in, I believe, 1992, was done in recognition of that work that is done by English teachers. Yeah, next.
So I should have said that we also have Gabe McCormick, our Senior Director of Teaching and Learning, grades 8 to 12. He actually created the pie chart that you're looking at. So as Hal said, the 5th teaching assignment for math, science, social studies, and world language generally comes in the form of direct academic support. The majority of those teaching assignments are within our tutorial program. which is a mainstream academic support program. We also have used these 5th teaching assignments, and I won't read all of these, but to support our Teachers Mentoring Teachers program, which is the support program we have for all new teachers, not only new to teaching, but new to teaching at Brookline High School, and it's led by 2 teachers. As you can see, also GSA, one that's not sort of distinctly academic support is composting and gardening work led by a social studies teacher that is essentially overseeing the shift to composting to own by the schools rather than by DPW and volunteers. Quite a bit of support of these 5th teaching assignments go to the Calculus Project, to Math Center, to other academic academic centers, help centers. The other key, the blue, represents world language. So in beginning and intermediate, so 1 and 2 and intermediate, beginning 1, beginning 2 and intermediate, Spanish and French, we have a second teacher in those rooms. I should say Chinese as well. So we don't have what we'll talk about later, which is a co-teaching model. We don't have a regular educator and a special educator. We have the lead teacher and then a second teacher embedded in those classes, which tend to have a high percentage of students on IEPs and a high percentage of students who are new to learning the language. I think next slide, if you would, Betsy. Thank you. Gabe, is there something you would add, given that you put together that pie chart?
No, I think you summarized it spot on.
Okay.
Could you do you mind going back 1 second, just so I can understand, what are the numbers are the number of sections being, or the number of, what is the numbers meaning?
Specifically the number of teachers devoted to each one. So it's that.
So that's FTEs, or that's a single course release for a teacher?
So for example, it's 46 teachers involved in tutorial. So that 46 represents.
But each one of them is doing 1 course release?
Correct.
Okay.
A 0.2.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
1/5 of their assignment is.
We also wanted to just give you a sense of number of FTE devoted, as well as the number of students served. I'll just let you look rather than read that to you. Have you look. I think one clarification, when we say Teachers Mentoring Teachers serves all students, is because our teachers do the most important work. Every year we add about 20 new teachers. They are supported by an induction program and non-evaluative feedback, which is key for all teachers as they're learning and growing, especially ones who are new to us. So, question, Steve,
Yeah, just to make sense of this slide, are the ratios represented here in line with historical norms? Do they represent practices that you think are adequate? It's hard to interpret it without.
Sure.
The answer is yes, certainly.
We want to just get.
Sorry. The answer is definitely yes. For tutorial, the numbers are about the same as they have been for years. Same with the second teacher pushing into those early level beginning Spanish classes. The increased area would be increased support for scholars and Calc project. We've shifted some of the support, realizing that especially in the math, we have 4 math teachers, for example, and 1 science teacher pushing directly into those programs. So the classes, the blocks, for example, when the scholars class meets, we have a math teacher that gets embedded into that class to sort of bring the support there rather than have that support happen in other classes, especially since a kid who's in scholars is less likely to have room in the schedule for tutorial. So to add that support and or calculus project support, we found is better in that class. So we sort of do that as a push-in model. AP Science Labs, that's a consistent number that we've had for years. And help centers varies a little bit, but pretty consistent.
Thanks.
Mariah, looks like you have a question.
I was just wondering, the AP Science Labs, is that an extra, is that like a block for labs? Or is
Yes,
that academic
AP Science
support?
classes go for 6 blocks rather than 4 blocks. So for example, if you're teaching chemistry, typically I try to schedule you to have 2 chemistry classes with labs that mesh. So you wind up teaching the 6-block AP Chemistry A and B block and the 6-block AP Chemistry B and C blocks, and they mesh. So because for the AP Science classes, all the AP Science classes meet 6 times a week rather than 4 times a week like all of our other academic classes.
Can you speak to the notion that that impacts the 5th teaching assignment? So availability for other.
Well, I guess my question too is that an academic support or is that just an academic? If it's just your science lab, does it belong, is it the same like the rest of these or not?
It is a little different
Okay.
than the rest of these. It's a little different also. There's a stipend that's involved in this because it is certainly a different type of work that's being done. That there's a long series of meetings that we had together on that.
Should we go next slide?
Yep.
Sorry, Hal, before you move on, can you just explain the difference between tutorial and help centers and where there's overlap with tutorial and help centers in terms of student body?
Sure. Help centers are generally speaking before school, very occasionally after school, and they're drop-in centers for students to come in who need help with their math homework. There's one teacher supports the social studies, one the world language. It's just mostly a math thing. And we have just found that that's a real need for kids to have that, be able to sit down with a math teacher at 7:30 in the morning, 7:45, and get that extra help done. More so than, it's a different type of support than tutorial. Tutorial specifically, it's assigned to a student in a class.
Credit bearing.
It's credit bearing. We'll have one math teacher, one science teacher. In a room, we'll hope to have nearby a social studies teacher and a world language teacher so kids can actually float back and forth if need be, if they need specific help in one of the subjects. But that's a course that's on a kid's schedule, on a student's schedule, that they'll meet 4 times a week, as opposed to Math Center, which is just much more of a drop-in service.
Thank you.
Of course.
So I think we wanted to try to give examples of course releases that we've had. You heard as we talked about class sizes that we had 2 different types of course releases that I would describe as temporary this year. One temporary, one more permanent. The temporary were the support of the 9th grade English pilot. So you see it there as 0.7 FTE, 0.5 in the English department, and 0.2 in order to support the 9th grade English pilot. We are not carrying that or planning to carry that forward into 24-25. That first bullet just speaks to generally where course releases have come is through innovation fund programs, most generally, I should say. There are examples though, and this is not an exhaustive list, but we wanted to provide some specific examples. So when the social studies team was developing the WISP course, we devoted what happened to be a 0.2 course release to one teacher, Stephanie McAllister, and then a 0.2 plus 1 or 5th teaching assignment for Sarah Schuster to develop that course. That was for a single year in preparation for the rollout of WISP. And we took that out of high school FTE, but to be clear, high school FTE is district FTE. Other examples would be work to support geometry in 1920, and I think I have that date right. I don't think I need to name the teachers again. It was an added detail bonus for you all. I would say there are other pieces where other examples of course releases that we're not currently doing. So given COVID and given a pause in international travel, we have not been using any FTE towards the China Exchange Advisor to support that that's a intensive role in supporting both students from China, from BHS, and that overall exchange. In the past, we have used point 2 towards family and community engagement. We have not done that for several years. And then as we were really doing a lot of international travel, in part related to our global leadership program, we were using some FTE to support staff chaperones, given the amount of work that goes into international travel. Looks like there may be a question. No.
So I do have a question that pertains to scheduling a little more generally. So there are 7 core academic blocks, correct?
Yes.
A through G. And the most teachers, well, for academic blocks though, I guess X sort of counts, but so A through G are the 7 main ones. And most teachers are using 4 of those blocks for course instruction plus a 5th for tutorial, for instance. So what are they doing in the remaining 2 blocks?
By contract, 4 of those blocks are prep blocks. By contract, 4 of them are duties, but that's been negotiated down to 2. So that's now 2. For the most part, 2 or 3 are being used for duties. So that's the balance of the 28 instructional blocks that happen during a week.
Gabe, were you unmuting for a moment?
Yeah, I think Hal wrapped it up there with the 28 total blocks during a week, which is I think a helpful way to think about it, because the contract defines a 1.0 at the high school as 20 assigned instructional blocks per week.
David, it looks like you might have a follow-up. But
No, I think I follow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Suzanne?
Yeah, thank you. So so every teacher has more or less a 4+1. Is that, I mean, so would it, there be?
Math, science, social studies, world language.
Okay, right. And so is it possible a teacher would teach 5 and not have the +1? Or they wouldn't do that?
We haven't, no, not in the last 20 years, no.
Okay, okay. And do they have a say, do the teachers get to pick their +1? Or do you assign them to a plus?
Generally assigned in collaboration between curriculum coordinators and high school leadership, high school administration. I think I want to correct one thing that Hal said, and that is there was, in my tenure, we had one teacher who, instead of a +1 assignment, had 5 classes. And I'm not going to I'm happy to talk offline about some of the general details about that, but it was a very specific scenario.
Okay.
I think one thing to add, that's helpful is, you know, on the first kind of the donut chart, the majority of +1 assignments are tutorial. Right? So most people are doing tutorial with this. And then there's a big chunk of world language teachers who are that second teacher. And really the other assignments, like the help centers or the AP Science or the Calc project, are a pretty small representation of the total +1s. So really, like, another way to think about this is the tutorial program.
So if we go, oh, sorry, Mariah. Oh, David, you're calling on people. Sorry.
Sure, go ahead, Mariah.
But while the 20, well, the 4+1 is not contractual, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And so did you want to clarify something?
No, it's good.
So I think the other thing that I think can seem to fall under the umbrella of course releases are FTE we use towards supporting, I would say, signature Brookline High School programs. So African American and Latinx scholars, we support the leadership of that program, which combines academic support, socio-emotional support. Our leader of the Scholars Program really does a range of jobs in her role as a teacher. As you've heard before, the LEAP program had what some might term, and I've termed, a course release. I would describe that as program leadership. And School Within a School, a program that serves 125 students, has a full-time counselor and dean, so doing 2 jobs for 125 kids, which is beyond a typical caseload for a dean. There is additional program leadership, given that SWS runs its own advisory, runs town meeting, runs quite a bit of programming for students in SWS. I would also argue the leader of school within a school has very much a school-wide leadership role, and that's been one of the wonderful aspects of having Dan Bressman in that program coordinator role. Teachers mentoring teachers is a little bit funky. You've seen it listed both as a +1 assignment and as, in this case, point to a course release. And so we have one of our leaders in TMT using a +1 assignment and the other using a course release. And it's related to what Hal's talked about in terms of AP Science, which we could devote a whole meeting to the complexity of AP Science. Questions? Do you want to?
Sure. The other large use of FTE at the high school that's not the standard way people would think about instruction is co-teaching. Co-teaching is an IEP-driven service support that we give, where a special education teacher is paired with a general education teacher. It happens in English, math, science, and social studies. And as you can see, this year we have 54 sections that are co-taught. That represents 10.8 FTE of this year's budget. It's down from last year, but as you can see, I pulled the numbers for the past 8 years. You can see that the number has gone up substantially in the past 8 years to where we are today.
Sorry, go ahead, Suzanne.
Could you explain this a little more? So typical, many times in IEPs, they have assistant teacher para to be, helping out. But how is it in the IEP it says co-teaching? I'm just wondering how that works.
I think it is a potential service that becomes available in 9th grade. And I would say generally there is, as we would expect, desire to support students in making the transition from 8th to 9th grade. It becomes available as an option. And I think the appeal of having 2 educators rather than a single educator makes it such that teams oftentimes say, we would like co-teaching. And as much as I admire and support the work that co-teachers do, I think it is one of those areas of 8th to 9th grade transition that I know we will touch on, that we give attention to, that we can give more attention to in terms of how we're supporting 8th grade students, families, and teams to make decisions in advance of the high school. More candidly, I think there's some notion of how hard the transition to BHS is, and I don't think that that's necessarily accurate, but it is sort of a myth and a desire to support students, and so co-teaching is a good model for that.
Mariah?
But just to be clear, this isn't just in 9th grade. This is all the way through.
Those numbers represent all 4 years. That's correct.
Right. So it's not that it's only happening for the 8th to 9th grade transition.
Didn't mean to, I think what I wanted to make clear is that the first time that choice is available to families is in 9th grade, and 8th grade teams are making those decisions. And then it is, I believe, rare, we don't have that data here, that students are moving out of co-teaching.
I wouldn't call it rare. There's a pattern of kids that do, it definitely does decrease a little bit over sophomore year, junior year.
But people have a stay put, so.
That is correct.
Right.
Right. The entire team and the family would need to agree to the change.
You mentioned that it's an option, so it's not that it's being written into an IEP as a requirement, it's part of a discussion?
Oh, no, it's in the IEP as a requirement. It comes to us as a requirement.
And as a requirement that it be a teacher or just additional support?
Special educator.
Plus a regular ed teacher. Right. So option in terms of when the team is meeting to discuss how to best support a student from 8th to 9th grade, it isn't something that 8th graders would have because there is not a co-teaching model K to 8. The option is in what the team could determine to best support a student to make academic progress.
If I could, when this works well, it's great. It's a great support. It's a wonderful way. It keeps kids out of sub-separate classes. It's a great way to get inclusion. It's a great way, and the partnerships that work really well, the two teachers, it's a true pairing. It's not a general educator standing up and delivering and a special education a teacher or support person off in the corner. It's two people teaching together, working and talking together and planning lessons together that will fulfill the needs and talk to the different needs of the whole diverse group of kids that are in the room in front of them.
At the K-8 level, and I understand you're with the high school, but is it your understanding that the equivalent of the 10.8 would be part of pullouts, but there is a similar structure?
Probably.
Well, I do mean as a pullout, that's why the model doesn't exist at K-8, because those students.
K-8 has push-ins. That's what they have is push-in
Okay.
with special educators. Can I ask a follow-up to my other question?
Go ahead.
My question is twofold. One is, do we have any evidence on the impact of this on student outcomes? And my second question is, goodness, it just flew out of my mind. Oh, do we have professional development for teachers who are implementing this model so that they're implementing it to the level you said when it works well, it works like that? How do we make sure that when we do it, it always works like that?
Yes, we have professional development, lots of it that's been dedicated to this over the years. We've worked with Landmark. We've worked with, there's another group that came in.
No, I think it's mostly Landmark.
Yep, mostly Landmark. I'm sorry, the second question was?
Are we measuring it?
You know, the evidence I can give you is the difference now in the number of small group special ed classes that I have, which is very small. It's a much smaller number than it used to be. So kids definitely are staying in this inclusion model rather than using the small group special ed classes as much.
And I would be candid, no, there has been interest in looking at co-teaching that dates back to my entry into this role when Nicole Gittens was here running teaching and learning and Sam Zimmerman was here running OSS, and there has not been a study of co-teaching. There's been robust support, both PD, and we also pay towards some hours that each pair receive over the summer in order to work together. Not a huge number of hours, I believe 5. Yes, so it's a fair question.
I would
Yeah,
also.
I want to go to Valerie, who's patiently been waiting a while, and then we'll go to Gabe.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, David. I had a question. You've been talking about this is an alternative to sub-separate. I'm wondering whether there's any co-teaching in different levels, or is this just in standard level courses?
Just in the standard level courses.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Gabe.
I think another piece to mention related to whether we have success is that we see the number of co-taught sections decline significantly in 11th and 12th grade. And so, students are no longer in need of the service in the same way. We didn't put the data on the slide quite in this way, but there are almost no co-teaching sections in 12th grade, and there are very few in 11th.
Helen?
Just a quick question. If a teacher's dual certified in special ed and science or math or whatever, do you still do the co-teaching?
First of all, can you send us their phone number?
Okay.
No, it has to be a separate teacher. But many of the teachers that we are using as the special ed side co-teachers are dual certified. That's the type of person that we are.
But why wouldn't that satisfy the IEP if you have a teacher who has both?
Don't know the answer.
I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah, I can jump in a little bit on that, and with the caveat that I'm not an expert in special ed, but Jed Miller, who kind of supports primarily 9th grade special ed as one of the administrators at the high school, he's described it to me as co-teaching provides specialized instruction without which a student would otherwise be in a sub-separate, like a small group class. And there is something about having 2 people so that you can break off a group of kids while the course is continuing, or things like that.
And I might just add, in general, we have a very good special education director at the high school who is new to us this year, Robin Fabiano, who comes from Westwood most recently, from Newton, also a great deal of experience in Newton. So I think that it's an opportunity for us to look at the use of resources and, more importantly, to look at how we support students in all levels with co-teaching and other models.
Suzanne?
Yeah, I might suggest that we bring this to curriculum. I think there's still a lot of questions, and I would love to have a deeper discussion. This is right now?
Yeah, this is a budget presentation, right?
Yeah, but I'm just saying, we also might want to bring it to curriculum. There seems to be a lot of questions about the program itself. So anyway, just a
Sure.
suggestion.
And Robin said she could be here tonight. I agree with Mariah. We're focused on budget and staffing for the high school. And I know Robin would want to be a part of that conversation. Happy to come to curriculum.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Was that the end?
Are there additional slides here, or?
Was that your actual end, or were you ending because you thought you were being told that?
I don't think that we have more than this planned in terms of, as I began, I thought, defining terms, but help me understand what more. Looks like there are more questions.
Mariah?
So I think that the big question that people asked was, like the sort of the big marquee question was, is the 5 FTE going to address, the 5 FTE that were requested in the budget going to address the problems that the high school experienced this year? And I don't think I saw that question answered. So maybe if you could just
to put a little more detail around that question, Mariah, I think there's a specific sentence that was alarming to people in the budget book, which was, to return to more historic class sizes, the school requires at least 5.0 FTE to distribute across departments. And then it goes on from there. So 5.0 FTE additionally was allocated to BHS. So we want, I think, a little bit more information about that request. And I think we were also thinking about the curriculum, the subcommittee meeting, where I think, Hal, you said roughly approximating that you would estimate 10 FTE being what was needed. We wanted to know a little bit more about how you were making that projection.
Sure. So that 10 was not saying that would be what would fix it. That 10 was part of a range that I was talking about for what would have been, by formula, how many additional FTE we would have gotten based on the increase in students that we had this year. So we have 80 plus additional students this year. Therefore, we would have assumed somewhere between, typically either it's 1 FTE per 12, somewhere between 12 and 15 would be the common ratios that we've always used. Therefore, we should have had somewhere between 7 and 10 new teachers in that, no, I'm sorry.
5 and 6.
5 and 7, and then there were FTE that we dropped. So it was really a question of where we were away from where we thought we would be in order to staff ourselves properly for this year.
Right. So I guess we were wondering how you settled on 5 as the request, and whether, I guess if I may, I think what we're really looking for is an expression of confidence that what you were allocated in FTEs will prevent, or not, will prevent a crisis of the kind that we saw this year. Because I think on the school committee, we're pretty keen on making that a high priority.
We're keen on making it a high priority too.
Okay.
I would say 5 would be a little low. We probably would need somewhere closer to 7. If I pull up my numbers and looked at every single class, which I have done, and I looked at the opening day class rosters and how many people I have in each one of those classes, and say, what would I have needed in my sectioning meetings, and imagining where I would have made every type of compromise and move with a curriculum coordinator. If I add that up, it probably comes close. It does come closer to 7 than to 5. So that's probably that's the number that assures us that we open the way that the coordinators would want to open up each one of their departments.
Mariah?
And it's super complicated when you look at those numbers. If I can just give a little bit more perspective here. You look at some numbers and you say, oh, these classes are overcrowded. For example, in advanced math, 9th grade, let's take 9th grade geometry. You look at 9th grade, every one of those classes opened to 29. So I had 6 classes of advanced math open to 29. That's very crowded. Those are very large classes. That's not the overcrowded class. The overcrowded class is hidden in the honors level. At the honors level, I had 13 classes that opened at an average of 24. That's where my kids are going when they realize that they're not doing advanced math, which we historically know is going to be about 11% of the kids. So I know that of that group that's in advanced math, I need space for those kids to come down into honors math. This year, it's extreme. The real overcrowding is now in honors math, where I've got 26 or 27 now. Right? When we first talked about these numbers, the numbers were still 29 in advanced and 24 in honors. Now I've got 26 in most of those honors classes, and the advanced classes have dropped to 26 as well. That's really where the overcrowding is really felt. And it also prevents kids from moving, right? I've got kids in advanced math who might want to move down, but my honors classes are so large now that I just don't have space to move those kids in. And it might even be a kid in standard who wants to move up into the honors class, and they're going to have trouble moving in because those classes are so crowded at this point. I just thought that was important context to understand, because and I'm happy to go through line by line what we did and how we made those decisions. It's a complicated thing, a complicated process, but we endeavor to do better for this year.
Mariah?
First off, I just want to say thank you, because I know all that scheduling is a big beast and you handle it with aplomb, so thank you. My question is about going back a year. How many FTE did you give back last year to this year? How many fewer FTE did you have this year than last year?
I don't know that there's a clear understanding of that. I believe that number was 3 in the form of paraprofessionals. I don't know that that's what is on the record as having been given back.
So no teachers were given back, 3 paras only were given back.
Yes, however, know that if we're giving back, say, one can also trade in X number of paras for a teacher. So while I agree no teacher positions were given back, we also look very carefully at how we're allocating and supporting with paraprofessionals and determine where we might need a new teacher or an additional teacher and trade in some of that FTE. Historically, we have.
So this is a true 5 FTE plus up. It's not because you lost some, and so actually it's like a 3 FTE or a 2 FTE. It's a true 5. Okay, thank you.
And Stephen, I want to point to, I wrote that budget entry, and I think Dr. Guillory has been very focused on wanting to support the high school, and also obviously supports the entire system. And I think that language reflects, yes, we would hope for and want more, and also understand that 5 would be helpful in moving us in that direction. So thus the language of.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And there was no implicit criticism in my question. I in our budget guidelines, our very first one is to address class sizes. So I think there's a strong will, if I could speak for the committee, to make sure that this problem is adequately addressed going forward, and that the 5.0 increase was in fact sufficient. So I'll admit that it's a little concerning to me right now to think that perhaps an additional 2 FTEs might be needed. So I think that's something that we'll probably have to deliberate on going forward in further iterations of this budget book.
And thank you, Stephen. As Hal said, we're happy to open our books in that way in order to look at, how we do sectioning. It's been one of the wonderful things about having Gabe involved, is that Gabe is helpful in terms of both looking at us and pushing us in some ways within sectioning, and carrying that information both, from the high school to district leadership. So it's been great to have him embedded in that process.
Has there been any consideration to looking at the 4+1 model? You mentioned that there was 1 teacher in your experience who taught 5. Are there other teachers who would perhaps be amenable to taking on 5?
That is quite a question, and I appreciate you asking. My honest sense is that will require a great deal of time and effort and will given how critical that fifth teaching assignment or 4+1 structure is, not only for supporting students academically, but also for recruiting and retaining high quality teachers. And so there is not currently consideration of that for this year on this kind of timeline. And I tend to think of it as a teacher being willing to go over a bridge and saying, I will do a fifth teaching assignment rather than 4+1. And I think that there would be a great deal of hesitation to do that on teachers' behalf. And even though Mariah rightly points to, it is not embedded in the contract, it is a long history of past practice that we would be navigating.
And at the same time, we believe those supports are critical. We believe that those supports are what make the high school a success. That tutorial program, those push-ins into Calc Project, those push-ins into Scholars, that math center is what makes the high school work. We think that that's a necessary support. So that's not something we could just pull away and say, oh, we're still the same Brookline High School. It would fundamentally change a lot of the experience for many kids at the high school.
Helen.
So I think one of the big issues too, it seems to me from last year, was there were 80 more kids, new kids who came in. And, you know, what will be important to know is, are we going to have that same influx this year, or will it be less? And
it's relatively flat.
Right, so that may allow 5 to be enough. If we get another 80 students, 7 is probably more where we need to head to.
No, we're still dealing with that influx from last year.
Yeah, but there's in and out, you know, there are kids who leave. Yeah.
If it's flat.
I'm just saying flat based on 8th grade roll into 9th grade, which has been a inaccurate measure, but is the measure that we have been using. I can give you good news. We drop almost 100 the next year, so you can have some money back.
Be careful what you say.
Mariah?
Can't have any money back.
But my point being is, I would encourage anybody out there who's listening, who has an 8th grader, who's planning to come to the high school, to register and make sure they get their classes now, if they want to get what they want to get.
Go ahead, Mariah.
I just want to say, I'm just thinking about the teacher perspective that you're rightfully reflecting on. And imagine a case of a teacher who's teaching 4 Spanish AP classes that are all at 30 students each, and they're doing a +1. And for that teacher, it might be very appealing to actually have those kids spread out over 5 and not have their +1 obligation. And it might result in a better experience for the students who are in their class because they're in that smaller class. I'm not saying that's right. I'm just thinking that there could be ways, while we're preserving the overall intent of the +1, to look at like opportunities to do, at the end of the day, teaching and learning is about a teacher in front of a class, right? So where we can make those moments, if they exist for specific pockets of teachers, to reduce those worst case scenarios, relieve the burden on the teacher who is already highly burdened with their homework prep and all, or homework review and all of that. I think it's an opportunity, and it also does a service to them also, because their classes are so big, and relieving that pressure. So just throwing that out there. I have no idea if it makes sense, but it's a chance. Okay.
Anyone else? All right, we can move on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, so this next item was before you last week, and you had asked if I would put dollar amounts in for each of these kind of items that roll up into the contracted services line item. Know that when we say contracted services, it's also known as professional and technical services when you're looking at the budget information that we've presented. So I don't think it's just kind of check, you have it. It's in the slides, it's up on the website. So if you want to take some time to look at that. The only thing I will note is that as I went through and I was doing this review to create this information for this slide, that I did notice that there was one line item that was titled, that should be retitled transportation. So I'm flagging this because as I see these things, as I go through and I learn that something is charged to a line that is, different than what I thought when we were rolling this up, I'm flagging it because I'm going to put it in the correct account. When we get done with our process and you really vote and adopt a final budget, I will take all of the changes and everything that's happened from the time that I prepared the document originally up until now, and I'll adjust everything at once. So I'm just flagging a few of these as I see them so that you're aware that I'm going to make.
Where'd that come from, Susan?
It's right now it's sitting. See that note down there?
Yeah.
There's an amount that's sitting in the contracted services line, and it was titled something a little obscure. It didn't say anything about transportation.
Okay.
When I asked what it was so that I could put these in the right categories for you, and I looked at what had been put there, it was actually another transportation type expense. So I'm going to move that over to transportation once I clean everything up. For your
Thanks.
final budget, okay?
Can you just remind me what the ACT is an abbreviation for in that first line?
Activity, sorry, it should ACCT. It's athletic student activities. And so
Is it
there's-
only
there's
athletic activities or like student
No.
activities like field trips and
Field
stuff?
trips too.
Okay.
I just lumped them together. So it's like athletic officials and then field trips, yeah. It's not, but the transportation, that 257 is a transportation expense and should not have been, it shouldn't be showing here because there's actually a transportation line. So again, as I clean up and I see these things, I just want to make sure that we start to put everything where it belongs. So that's that. And then the last slide is, of course, your vote for this evening. Again, it's similar to the vote that you took last year, stating that the superintendent's initial budget is $138,642,989, and that the town allocation is currently $136,413,421. This is based on the revised information I shared with you earlier, and that the school committee will continue to work with the superintendent, select board, and town administrator to align these numbers through identification of additional efficiencies and revenues. So that's the vote you took last year. That's the vote before you tonight, and that will allow you to meet the requirement of the February 15th bylaw.
I'll move it.
All right. Mariah seconds. Stephen has a question, it appears.
Yeah. So just from the last two meetings alone, we learned that the ELA investment is approximately $100,000 underfunded, much better than the previous meeting, but still 100 under. And then from today's meeting, we learned that it would be preferable to add an additional 2 FTEs to BHS, which is about 160K. So that's another 260K. Bearing in mind Superintendent Guillory's comment that we can't propose something without proposing to remove something, where do calculations like that fit into proposed votes like this? Do you suggest that we table considerations like these? I say you, opening this up for deliberation. Do you suggest that we table items like these for further votes or include that in today's vote?
No.
I think that we should wait for future votes because the harder work, in a sense, is going to begin in earnest over these next several weeks. So this number that's the current allocation is a moving target. It's going to move a little more, of course, and we ultimately are going to need to align with it. But we're not going to really know what we're even aiming for entirely until we get to late March, early April, and we will take another subsequent vote at that point. And that's going to be the more critical vote because that's the number that we send to town meeting. And by that time, hopefully we will have a better understanding on our end with the assistance of district staff as to what are the priorities for funding for next year and what are the difficult sacrifices that we as a committee would feel that we need to make in order to accommodate the budgetary constraints.
Well said.
That I am still uncomfortable. I would also like to know if further savings have been identified since over the last couple of weeks as you continue to look through the budget. Have there been any items identified as areas where we can find further savings? Or is that being reserved for future iterations of the budget?
Yeah, we are actively looking at, We're actively looking at all aspects of our budget, and in fact, going through the grant, looking at the grants and saying, okay, are there items here? Is there capacity here to move things around at all? And when I get to the revolving funds, I'll do the same. So I'm kind of keeping a little bit of a tally. Some things might amount to small money, and other things, we're still investigating to see if there might be other opportunities. And I think you have some studies that are out there where folks are looking at different options, and we'll have more information about that in the next couple of months. So we'll bring forward additional information. I mean, certainly I shared with you what the sections are, at the elementary school. Now we're hearing that we may need additional FTE allocated to the high school, but we'll also get our enrollment report from Cropper and McGibbons, and that will be at the next meeting. That'll be very informative about where they feel our enrollment projections are. It's a much deeper and more in-depth study. And if their enrollment projections are showing something similar to what NESDEC is, then what we know is that our enrollment is not going to be going up for the next couple of years. That should inform some of maybe the choices that we'd like to make. If we're seeing numbers that are shifting around, then we might want to make other choices. But I think the enrollment piece is important.
I understand all that, and I understand that that it's a moving target, and it doesn't make sense to get too far ahead of that moving target. But I guess I don't understand when the deliberations around when to make decisions are supposed to actually happen. Are we pushing that off until the last possible second? When we have the clearest possible figure to reach?
So I do agree with you, Stephen, to the extent that I do think this is something we really need to move on in earnest. We don't have to get there today, but we do need to be moving in that direction, certainly. And I would agree with you that it should be well before early April, late March, but we're still somewhat in early February. So there's a little bit more time, but I would agree that we really need to start getting into that discussion about what are the sacrifices we're going to need to make as a district. So we did look, for example, as you know, at the number of sections that we could potentially consolidate and still be within our class size guidelines. And that amounted to almost $1 million. We did hear from some members who are concerned about reducing that number too much, but that is one potential area that we could look in to realize some degree of savings. Even looking at the list that Dr. Gibbons provided
But even
today.
in that example, like I would want to oppose that, for instance, as much as I possibly could. Like I would want to keep that in my back pocket until everything else is exhausted, because I think class sizes would be something I would like to sacrifice last before we explore every other option. So I always wonder when those deliberations are going to actually occur. So when is the next docketed conversation about budget? I'm sorry to belabor this, but I often get confused about the process at this point.
Well, we're going to be having discussions on the budget at pretty much every meeting from this point going forward. Mariah? Go ahead.
I wonder, though, if we shouldn't have a meeting, even if it's a specially scheduled one, that we just talk about the budget. Because when we do this in little chunks, there's a really big thoughts and decisions that need to happen, and it gets rushed, and it's late at night, and we're all tired. And I just think that it deserves more time than we're giving it. And, it could be a finance subcommittee. That could be okay, too. But there's all something to be said for making sure everyone's going to be there, because if we're going to make decisions, we're going to have to talk about them all again anyway. So I feel like, and it's so high profile and important, I feel like it probably is a full committee topic. Anyway, I just think that it deserves like its own meeting, really, to crank through it, and probably an extended one.
I think that's a good idea.
Yep.
Anyone else? All right, so Helen moved this vote, which again is more of a pro forma vote at this stage, but we're soon going to be entering into the more detailed deliberative discussions. And the vote is, the superintendent's initial budget is $138,642,989, and the town allocation is currently $136,413,421, and that's a revision as of just 2 days ago. The school committee will continue working with the superintendent, select board, and town administrator to align these numbers through identification of additional efficiencies and revenues. So Helen has moved it. Do we have a second? Mariah seconds. Stephen, your vote.
Yes.
Mariah.
Yes.
Suzanne.
Yes.
Andy.
Yes.
Helen.
Yes.
Sarah.
Yes.
Valerie.
Yes.
Natalia. And I also vote yes. All right, so that brings us to presentation and discussion, 8th to 9th grade transition study committee, new guidance for 9th grade course recommendations.
Hello, everybody. It is nice to see you this evening. Tonight, we're going to talk about some work that actually started last spring. Last spring, the school committee charged us with disrupting the systems and structures, resulting in the underrepresentation of historically marginalized groups in our honors and advanced classes at Brookline High School. Our approach to this work has been multi-layered, including reimagining the 9th grade and establishing a task force charged with adapting the recommendation process. Tonight's docketed topic is our changes to the recommendation process. Gabe McCormick and Matt Dubois are here to discuss the changes recommended by the task force and their rationale. The work of reimagining 9th grade is more complex and nuanced. This week, a group of citizens organized and expressed their thoughts regarding deleveling. I want to be clear, we are not deleveling courses, as that would be antithetical to the culture of inclusiveness that we are striving to create. All of the levels are still present in the instruction. These classes present differentiated instruction delivered in heterogeneously grouped classrooms. This instructional methodology is one for which the teachers have received extensive and ongoing professional development. In our reflections on the citizen concerns we have heard and read over the past week, we realized we missed some steps in launching a full-scale adoption of a new course. The Office of Teaching and Learning unequivocally supports the culture of inclusive excellence we are trying to create for our first-year students as they enter high school. Following Gabe and Matt's presentation on course recommendations, the high school team is present to answer any questions the committee may have about reimagining 9th grade, if the committee so chooses. Realizing that this discussion is undocketed, the team is also willing to collect your questions this evening and come back at the next meeting prepared for a more fruitful discussion. I'll now turn the mic over to Gabe and Matt.
Thanks, Jody. Good to see you all again. School committee, I'm Gabe McCormick, he, him pronouns, Senior Director of Teaching and Learning for Secondary Education. Matt, do you want to introduce yourself and then I'll jump in?
Yeah, thanks, Gabe. Matt Dubois, Senior Director of Clinical Services and Social Emotional Learning for the district.
And I am currently on the mend from COVID, so I may have to pause and cough a little bit. I hope you'll bear with me with that. As Jody mentioned, we are providing some updates on our 9th grade course recommendations. We'll talk a little bit about background and kind of the problem statement, which I think folks are familiar with, but we want to just make sure we're all on the same page. We'll talk a little bit about steps taken and then kind of where do we go from here. So the hope is that this part is fairly straightforward, and I think we're okay with some questions in between, but we don't expect the presentation side to take very long either. So problem statement, as has been discussed many times, both in this committee, in subcommittees, and in various other places, is that we have consistently seen a significant discrepancies in recommendations and enrollment in honors and advanced classes based on students' race and ethnicity. And this has been incredibly persistent. So a little bit of historical context is that these racial discrepancies in course levels have existed for quite some time. To my knowledge, the first time they were sort of publicly identified in a broad context was in March 2017 with Superintendent Bott. He sent a message to principals broadly to kind of re-investigate how they were looking at recommendations at the time. I believe students came to school committee that year and presented some of their experiences, particularly with math. However, in some discussion and in a conversation with some educators and at least an alum, that there was discussion of this at least back to 2000. So this has kind of been in the air, and certainly kind of on the staff side of things, this has been a discussion in the entire 10 years I've been here. And I know Matt was at the high school for a while, and he's kind of confirmed similar things. One of the challenges additionally to this process is that we've had a lack of defined objective standards for recommendations. I think folks are rightly nervous about using something like an MCAS score. However, we don't typically have common assessments in our middle school grades, our 8th grade in particular. As we've talked about kind of through the middle school review, we have different time on learning and some different inconsistencies in tier 1 instruction that have come up in the multiple studies we did throughout the last 2 years. But we don't have any sort of defined objective standards. Again, there's like no placement test for math or world language, so to speak. In addition, we've had some differences in schools in terms of how they go through the recommendation process, in terms of just what procedures would they use, how they may weigh certain aspects of a student's profile, or how they may involve families to a greater or lesser extent. And there's been minimal guidance from central office. My recollection is that March 2017 was the last time kind of a superintendent really sat with the principals and said, you have to look at this differently. And so we kind of are trying to roll all of that together in our thinking. So I think we'll go through the steps taken. I'm going to talk a little bit about the working group that Jody referred to as the task force. And then Matt will talk through the data we examined and kind of the actual guidance we came to. So the working group itself was a mix of K-8, K-12, and 9-12 or high school administrators. And part of what we'll address in kind of the next steps is this was an all administrators task force. Some of this was we were on a short timeline, and we're able to pick the folks who are available, right? Teachers are teaching all day, and including them was difficult within the timeline. And that's a concern we have and want to address in the future. But at the same time, we were able to have productive discussions. And we certainly, just to clarify, we had a high school gen ed coordinator, we had high school special education coordinators. Matt and myself kind of co-facilitated a lot of this. We had a couple of principals from the K-8s. Hal was part of the group, and at least a K-8 special educator or special education director. I'm not sure I'm catching all the roles, but that's a general sense. I think one of the things that was really important is that the group surfaced that there are a lot of variables more broadly than the recommendation process that sort of impact class enrollment, right? As kind of was identified moments ago during the high school presentation about classes, the fact that co-teaching exists only at the standard level will impact a student with co-teaching on their IEP, right? They have to sometimes make a hard decision about services and levels. Similarly, as kind of has talked about in a few different ways, right? A student's whole experience goes into this. And so class level and course recommendation alone are not the only factor. And we were tasked with and wanted to kind of see what we could do in a sort of a short-term, small-scale piece of work while we continue to do the long-term, more fundamental work to shift this. And so the working group really settled on a sort of consistent process guide. And so a set of steps and essentially like a recommendations checklist that schools could use. When we presented this to principals, the K-8 principals particularly, the feedback was that the guidance didn't go far enough and was not concrete enough for the guidance. We still didn't have objective factors, right? The working group felt like the best we could offer at that time was if we all follow these steps, an aligned set of practices would still help. But that was deemed through feedback to not be enough. Matt, you want to jump into kind of what we did next?
Yeah, thanks, Gabe. And one thing I want to start with, and Gabe surfaced something that's really important. So when we think about any decision-making process, and this is a very important decision-making process, when we combine quantitative sources of data with qualitative sources of data, we typically are much more effective in our decision-making. We're typically more accurate in our decision-making. And when we're thinking about accuracy within this context, we're really thinking about, are we effectively making sure that kids are enrolled in the classes that best meet their needs, their goals, their hopes for high school. And so this is a really, really important part of this work. And so we've sort of had for a long time been interested, are there some more objective sources of data that we can use and sort of put within this guidance to help guide teams? Now, as I say that, I don't want to make it seem as though folks have never, that it's been a purely qualitative process. Teachers and families and kids are using a lot of data, like grades, like attendance, right? But certainly, as Gabe offered, as a central office, we have not said, hey, here are some objective standards that you can use to really guide that process. Over the last, I would say probably 5 or 6 years, there's been a lot of data work at the high school. And that data work has really been built around identifying kids as early as possible who might benefit from additional support, who might need additional support. And as we've engaged in that data work, it sort of naturally lent itself to looking at middle school and particularly looking at 8th grade and thinking about, are there metrics within 8th grade that can help predict, particularly in the first half of 9th grade, how it is that kids do. And as we've engaged in that work, what we've found really robustly, and this might be obvious, and it's sort of bolded here, is the best predictor of 9th grade academic performance. We look at, for example, GPA across the 4 core content areas. The best predictor of 9th grade grades is 8th grade grades. And sort of unpacking that finding a little bit more, what we have really consistently found are that students who earn a B or higher in 8th grade math and science, they typically perform really well in that corresponding honors level class in high school. So they go on to perform pretty well in at least honors geometry and in honors physics. We've also sort of found the inverse of that, right? So when you look at students who perform below a B minus, we've typically seen them being far more likely to experience challenges in 9th grade. When we operationalize, what does it mean to have a challenge? Typically, we're looking at a D plus or lower. And so we've seen this over and over and over again. And I don't want to pretend like it's a perfect predictor. It isn't, but we found it in a really robust way over and over again. Gabe, I'll have you move to the next slide. And so because of this, right, we do have a good amount of confidence that kids who are earning a B plus in math, who are earning a B or higher in science, we can feel really confident that they're going to have success in honors in 9th grade. And so because of that, we've offered this guidance to teams that students who are earning at least a B or higher in math need to be recommended for at least honors in 9th grade for math. And then if you're earning at least a B or higher, both the first and second quarter in science, you need to be recommended for honors level physics. Now, the caveat that if you are a student with a documented need, so if you're a student with an IEP or a 504 plan, and that team has decided that a placement in a different level class is more appropriate to fit your needs, obviously that team is going to make a different decision. And so if you want to access the full guidance document, you can see that. Gabe, I'll have you go to the next slide. Now, one thing that Gabe and I are really sensitive to is that we don't want to make this seem as though a B or higher is a prerequisite. Kids who are earning below a B can absolutely still be recommended for honors or advanced. In some ways, this is just guidance, this is confidence that if you're earning at least a B in those first 2 quarters, there's a high degree of likelihood that you're going to have success in honors. One thing I do want to name here is we're thinking about this data work. Typically, when we're doing these analyses, we're looking at end of year grades of a B or higher. This guidance is looking at earning a B or higher in both the first and second quarter. And that's actually a higher standard. That's a higher threshold than ending the year with a B. So it's not perfectly aligned. The threshold's a little bit higher, but that might actually give us more confidence that those students would perform well in honors level courses.
If I could add one thing here, I think there was also a concern that's come up of is a student somehow stuck in an honors level class just because they're earning a high grade, right? A student might be getting an A in science, but have no interest in taking honors physics, right? And the answer is absolutely no, right? A student and their family can certainly override the teacher's recommendation. The recommendation is an input. It is not a binding piece of the equation by any means, and has not been, right? And many families take the recommendation into consideration and then make a different choice for their student every year.
Thanks, Gabe. We'll jump to the next slide.
I think one more piece on this one that has been a fairly consistent theme from high school coordinators and teachers is that if a student is on the edge of levels as they're kind of considering like, ooh, should they do advanced or should they do honors math, right? The coordinators of basically all leveled subjects encourage a recommendation for the higher level course primarily because of it's much easier to start in the higher level course and move down than it is to start in the lower level course and move up. It's a really challenging position. And they want to encourage students to take a challenge. There are opportunities for support at their high school, there's flexibility, and there is the ability to change levels if a student and their family realize it's not a good fit.
Thanks, Gabe. I think that's really important. And so I think as we're going through this work, we know that there's no process that's going to be perfect, right? There are students that are going to be switching levels. But if we're in this place of, okay, there might be a mistake here, I guess we would rather have a mistake in that direction than the other one. And that sort of reflects in that guidance. And so we did a little bit of testing and thinking about if we had applied this guidance last year, what would that have done to the recommendation process? And again, what I want to anchor as the goal of this work is to disrupt that process that we've seen over and over again, where a disproportionate number of students are being recommended for honors and advanced courses. And so we looked at students who earned at least a B, who didn't have an IEP, who didn't have a 504, but were then recommended for standard level physics or standard level geometry. And so last year, that would have resulted in 16 more students being placed in honors geometry. 3 of those students are students of color. More of an impact within honors physics, that would have been an increase of 33 students, 7 of whom are students of color. When we look at their performance during the first half of the year, the vast majority of those students are performing really well in their class. Now, what I offer here is that we can absolutely use that as evidence that maybe they're well matched, they're performing really well in that class. But we can also interpret it, oh, is there evidence here that maybe they could have also done well in an honors level class? It's impossible for us to know that, but it is sort of this interesting finding that the majority of those students are performing well right now in their courses. What I want to name, though, is this is not a perfect thing, and people absolutely have voiced some concerns. A thing that's been voiced is that grading is not consistent across schools. And so what could be a B in one school, maybe that's not quite a B in another school. We have specifically looked at this in a lot of our data work is, are there different outcomes within 9th grade based on sending school? And we haven't found that, but I also deeply appreciate that need that we have to more consistently have grading policies within middle school. There's also a concern as we're thinking about the students who do earn a B or higher and being recommended for standard, that some teachers have voiced, well, there might be supports that kids are accessing in 8th grade to earn that B that might not be available in 9th grade. So sometimes people will cite, well, they can take as many retakes as they want on a test, or they're getting one-on-one support that might not be available in 9th grade. And that's important. And it's really important that we listen to that. And I also know that the 9th grade team is deeply supportive with kids, and there are a lot of built-in supports available. But I think these ideas, and we're going to talk about this in a second, are going to be really important to unpack as we continue to think about this process. And so where do we go from here? So Gabe, we'll jump to the next slide. it would be really inappropriate, it'd be deeply unfair if we issued this guidance and then sort of walked away. We know that we don't understand the full impact of this guidance yet, right? And I know Hal was just talking about sectioning. This is probably going to have a very real impact on sectioning that we need to be paying attention to. And so the first thing, we'll have these data available to us actually in the next couple of weeks, is seeing how does this guidance initially impact the percentage of kids who are recommended for honors or advanced math, honors physics, and does that impact some of the disproportionality that we've seen? Probably, though, the more important thing, so our goal here isn't simply just to recommend more students, is that more students are having success in those courses. And so one thing that will be particularly sensitive to in the fall is looking at the percentage, the number of kids who are switching courses, right? And so we're seeing way more students moving from honors to standard, right? And if it's not addressing the disproportionality, that's really important feedback for us that we need to move in a different direction regarding our guidance. So those are sort of immediate things we're going to take a look at. But Gabe, I'll have you talk about some of the more long-term work.
Yeah, so as I alluded to, the working group was limited both kind of on timeline and in membership. And so in addition to this guidance, right, and making this shift, we also want to reconvene a new working group that would be able to start this spring and have a much longer timeline. And we think it's really important that this group be more inclusive, particularly with teachers, both 8th grade and 9th grade teachers, as well as guidance counselors, because these are folks who really are hands-on with students through this process, right? And one of the historic challenges is that 8th grade and 9th grade teachers don't spend enough time talking about one another's work to understand kind of this process. And so I think a potential side benefit is that we could build some of that connection and that relationship. We also need to improve our timeline for informing schools. This guidance has come out later than we would have liked. And I think spending the extra time was worth it for being thoughtful, but it does come at a challenging time, especially like right as second quarter grades are coming out for middle schools. And we also know that we need to solicit broader feedback before making the changes. We solicited some feedback as identified, but not as much as we would have liked. So I think at this time, we can kind of close the slides, open things up for any discussion or questions.
Helen, you have a question? Go ahead.
I may not have gotten this, but is this happening for this in the selections for September?
Yes.
It is happening. Okay. Then one other.
The selection criteria.
Selection criteria, if you get an A or B, you're automatically referred for honors. That was what I was asking. But the other piece that I think would be interesting if you're already looking at different aspects of whether it's successful or not, is to talk with the students who have been referred, and maybe even some of those who referred that decided not to, and how they felt about their choices and their learning.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great idea.
In terms of parents who override decisions, is it usually in the direction of the higher level class or both directions? Do we know?
Yeah, I think historically it's been towards a higher level class. I haven't looked at that specifically, but I think generally it's moving in that direction. So that would be interesting if we see some changes in that, but typically I think it's in that direction.
I think Hal can weigh in on
Go ahead.
that.
Yep. So yes, typically it is in the higher direction, but understand also there's a larger process of recommendation that goes on. Many of the schools engage in collaborative conferences with guidance counselors, and they're looking at the whole package of classes that a kid is taking, using the teacher recommendation as one bit of data to then make the overall set of recommendations. So in that type of process, it's often, and we encourage this, a sense of getting the right balance for a student for what courses they'll be taking in the 9th grade year. And sometimes that involves moving a kid up or deciding which one of these classes do we want to push somebody into the honors class, and which one is the student better served with the right supports in either direction, perhaps being in the standard class.
Sort of a follow-up question I have to that. Let's say that there's a student who mostly is being recommended for the college prep level. Is there encouragement to maybe try one class at the honors level? Does that type of
Again, this is the 8th grade guidance counselors, and for sure, if they see I mean, when we meet with them every year and talk with them and talk about this process specifically, certainly if they see some area where there's a chance that a kid could succeed, they're going to push that kid to do exactly that, to take at least one class at the higher level.
And in scenarios where I would hope there's always parental involvement, but not always, where there's not really a parent or caregiver who's offering input, is it pretty much just the school recommendation that's going to carry over? Does the student have some degree of say?
The student would have say in talking with the guidance counselor. So again, that's going to depend on the relationship the student has with the guidance counselor. There is a second level of support that we add, which is the calculus project. So the calc project meets with me several times, including after their summer calc project session, which takes place as part of our summer school. And they have numerous 8th grade kids there. And at the end of that, I sit down with the calc project teachers and they go through kid by kid which kids they know from having taught them for the 6 weeks over the summer, or the 4 weeks, I guess Calc Project runs over the summer. They go through and tell me this kid needs to be moved up into honors. So there's that second level, especially in math, that we do after getting a closer look at the kids.
Okay.
I would say,
Right.
Just really
Sorry.
quickly, one additional layer on that is that certainly a student in METCO or a student in STEPS also has their METCO liaison and their STEPS advisor as an additional advocate.
All right, Mariah, and then I'll go to Sarah. Mariah?
What I can't quite understand is if there is a question of objective standards and a question of the historical discrepancy of how students are recommended, how the grades actually address this, because the grades are made by the same people who are recommended and they're not based on any objective standards. So I don't understand how that actually like solves anything.
Yeah, so when, for example, using that B criteria, that moved us about half the way to removing that discrepancy, for example, in physics. So you're spot on. Absolutely, there are some biases and grades are not perfect. But for example, in this example where I showed last year, that would have had some, not a perfect, not a panacea at all, but would actually help to remove some of the discrepancy. And so that's why we're not thinking about this as just this B guidance and we can wipe our hands and we're good. There's a lot more work here, but we do have some evidence that it moves us in the right direction.
A follow-up to Mariah's question, have you looked at students who, let's say, the parents overrode the decision, they went into the higher level class, and they did well in the higher level class, despite maybe getting a C in 8th grade? Do we have data on that?
I don't think we've looked at that specifically, but I think we certainly can.
All right, Sarah? Oh, that's your question? All right. Mariah?
Up to that. It's more a comment on the process of parental involvement and having a recent high school graduate and a recent high school entrant. Maybe I missed all the times I got the chance to comment on my kids' class selections, but I am pretty sure that I wasn't given, like, there was never something that said, this is what your kid picked, or your kid is picked and go look in Aspen. Maybe I missed them all. I don't know, but I've been at this now for 6 years as a high school parent, and I haven't gotten those inputs. I have had one child who spoke to me about their choices when they were going from 8th grade to 9th grade, and we adjusted them, but I was never actually sent the final results of that. And I have another child whose teacher unilaterally took them from honors to standard in math, and I was never informed as a parent. So I just want to like reflect the sort of lack of closing the loop that I have experienced as a parent, and hope that we can do better as well, because it's awfully hard for parents and caregivers to advocate for their student when they just don't have the information at the right time.
Sure, and Raya, I apologize that was your experience. One thing that we'll do, and actually it's a letter that's going to go out from me in a couple of weeks that happens in late February, where families are sort of walked through that process of when we call it the override period opens up. So there's going to be about a 2-week period where folks can take a look at those recommendations and then override that. We're going to leverage our school counselors and a lot of other folks and make sure that folks are getting that message. I'm saddened to hear that you didn't didn't get that letter, but that's sort of the process that we have to make sure that families have that voice in that process.
Is that a new process or an old process?
No, I think we've done it every year.
So I've missed it 6 times, even though I read everything. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Well, at the 8th grade, just to be fair, at the 8th grade orientations, isn't it talked about how kids are placed at that time? When you talk about the courses and stuff, and is that part of the presentation?
Yeah, so our middle school counselors oftentimes will have identified events for families and for guardians and parents and talking through the process. And typically, yeah, during that event, they're walking through what that process looks like. Our counselors are also typically meeting with kids in small groups or individually to walk through the process. It's a little bit different based on the school, and that's one thing that we want to address. But we try to find multiple venues to make sure the kids and their guardians and their parents are getting that information.
Right, right. And the other thing, that everybody here I think is aware of, but we have a policy that you can decide. The parent can decide which class the kid is going to be going into. It's their choice in the end. Kids may get recommended for a course, but you as a parent can determine, no, that's not appropriate, and have that change.
Yeah, but there's no opt-in on that, just to be
What do you
clear.
mean?
There's never any moment at which the parent validates or the caregiver validates, yes, I agree that these are the choices. Like, there might be some theoretical open window, but we're not going in there to affirm we understand those choices at even in the 9th grade transition, let alone in future years. Because basically 8th to 9th grade is pretty much what sets your trajectory, right? So, which is why we're having some of this conversation tonight. So even having that sort of, I understand my kids in these levels, I don't think there's anything where a parent actually does. You have to know when this window is.
Well, it may have changed.
And again, maybe I've missed it completely. I don't know. Am I missing every single communication from Brookline High School about my children's 8th to 9th grade transition, or from peer school?
I think you're missing some, because we advertise every year and we send out emails with the instructions to kids and families of this is how you register for your classes, and embedded in that is the line that when the override deadline is, parents wishing to override have to do so
I would
by this.
love to see how I've missed all these ones, because I don't think it's happening. I will tell you as a parent, unless they're going to spam or something. I mean, how many years have I been in this rodeo?
It's a lot of spam.
Yeah.
All right, Suzanne?
Thank you. I wonder if you could put this in context in terms of where we're going in the future. I think there's some information out there that, and we've said, looking at doing inclusive classrooms for math and science, and I'm wondering how these new recommendations will then be enacted going forward with that in mind. Do you know what I'm asking?
I'm not 100% sure, but are you talking about if we move to heterogeneous classrooms, what's the impact on recommendations?
Yes, I guess I am.
Yeah, so I think social studies is a good example, right? Social studies teachers in 8th grade used to offer recommendations for standard and honor world history 1. And part of the reason why WISP exists the way it is because they were uncomfortable with the discrepancies they were seeing in their 9th grade classes. And so social studies teachers do not offer a recommendation. So they're just not part of the process anymore because there's no recommendation to create for WISP. So depending on how things progress, right, assuming all 9th grade classes became heterogeneous, there would be no need for recommendations.
But so then 9th grade teachers make the recommendations for 10th?
Correct, and that's kind of how 10, 11, 12 works.
And for subject areas where there's both standard credit or honors credit within the same class, that recommendation would similarly be made by the 9th grade teacher?
Yeah, and so I think there's a couple different distinctions. So we have, excuse me, mixed level classes where students sign up for example, standard or honors before they enter the class. And so they'll be receiving a recommendation from the previous year's teacher. And then we also have earned honors or embedded honors where students just sign up for the class. And then around the 6 to 9 week period, depending on the class, they make a selection of, I want to do the rest of the year at standard level or at honors level. But again, part of the benefit of Brookline High, right, is each subsequent year, students have more and more choice and more options. It's like this expanding tree of selection. And so there's sort of more and more pieces at play every subsequent year.
All right, Valerie.
Hi, I just wanted to speak to what Mariah was saying a little bit. I have an 8th grader, and this is maybe on the K-8 side, but I haven't received anything from, say, a guidance counselor in terms of your recommendations have been made, go take a look. So I would just suggest that perhaps there's a communication there from the guidance office that can go out to let
So Valerie,
parents and
you get a
caregivers
letter
know.
from me in about 2.5 weeks.
Okay, great, thanks.
And I
Stephen?
think just
Sorry,
really
go ahead, Gabe.
Yeah, a lot of the questions that are being raised are why it's so important that it's not just the Office of Teaching and Learning doing this, right? It has to be collaborative because this cuts across all different parts of a student's experience. And in the past, a lot of this, the thinking we've done, and I think part of why we didn't get anywhere and didn't actually make any changes was because it was isolated in the Office of Teaching and Learning. And so the collaboration has been really helpful in that respect.
Stephen?
Thanks. First, just want to say thanks for this presentation. I think there's a lot of heat around this topic right now, and it's really helpful, I think, to take a step back, hear some of the context and thoughtfulness that has gone into your approach to this topic. And I really appreciate that you took the time to give us this context. So I have two questions. One is more of a clarification. So I'll start with that. So in the past 3 days, we've received about 50 emails from parents who were concerned that we were moving to a mandatory ELA course in 9th grade that has multiple tracks in the same classroom. I didn't hear this said explicitly, so I just want to confirm that you said that is not going to be the case next year. And in fact, we're going to continue the pilot class where there are multiple tracks in the same classroom, and that students can continue to choose different tracks of ELA in 9th grade. Is that correct?
We did not discuss that.
We did not discuss that.
I think as Jody identified at the beginning, I think we have some future opportunity to look into that more deeply. Jody, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, Stephen, what we did discuss was that math and physics aren't necessarily moving in that direction right now, realizing how complex and complicated the work would be to heterogeneously group those classes. The pause on the full expansion to heterogeneously grouped English classes is something that we still want to discuss with the committee.
Okay, I'll hold off on that question then. I thought I heard you intimate that, and I misunderstood. Let me ask my broader question, which is, what is your target for referrals? Is it a more proportional representation by race and ethnicity in honors and advanced courses? Is it merely an increase of representation? Is it a feeling of options among the students? What is your desired outcome with this solution?
Yeah, I'll offer some thoughts, and Matt, you may have additional and potentially different thoughts, right? Because there are, in some ways, Stephen, yes, to all of that. Realistically, I think from the humanities part of my brain, right, which is most of my brain, we want students to feel like they have really good options and that they have a really good 9th grade. The transition is really scary for a lot of students and a lot of families, and they feel really nervous. And the move from a smaller K-8 school where their cohort may be anywhere from 60 to 100 students to a cohort of 500, 550 students is really hard. And so we want to make sure that they feel good and they have a good landing, right? And that they have access to everything that Brookline High has to offer, right? That really thick course catalog that the school prides itself on should be accessible to everyone. And we have some concerns that historically it hasn't been. I think more concretely and more numerically, historically our white and Asian students and close on our multiracial students have been recommended and enrolled about 70% in honors and about 30% in standard or college prep. Our Latino students have been about 50-50, and our Black students have been about 70% in college prep and about 30% in honors. And that's data that's been shared before with the committee, right, over multiple years. We want to shift that number, particularly for our Black and Latina students, to be closer because, as folks have identified tonight and on previous nights, the high school works for a lot of kids. It works really well for a lot of kids, but it doesn't for a certain group of kids and a small chunk of that. And so we want to set students up for success in ninth grade so that they feel like they have as many options as possible. Matt, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, and one thing I would say, and Gabe said, so when you think about setting kids up for success for ninth grade, that starts if kids are joining us in BEEP. That starts in kindergarten and in first grade, and there's a lot of work that goes into that. And so, yeah, we have an interest in seeing that disproportionality removed. But our biggest interest is that kids are having success and that kids are accessing the classes that are attached to the goals that they have. And so there's a lot of different metrics that go into it, which sort of reveal the complexities that go into it. But Stephen, I think you're servicing some things that we'll absolutely be taking a look at.
And I think maybe to clarify one step further, right, when we talk about success, right, it's certainly like social success and making friends and, you know, being part of a larger community. But it's also for these particular courses, right, academic success. So we want kids to learn the most that they can learn. We want kids to get really good grades because we know that matters for their post-secondary options. And students who earn a full 7 credits are in a much better position than students who don't earn a full 7 credits in their first year.
Thanks. Just a follow up to that. Have you engaged with the Office of Educational Equity around possible professional development around implicit bias and the extent to which trainings on that topic might help change the referral process? Certainly not completely, but maybe somewhat. And I say that bearing in mind that one, that's one of many factors in this, and two, having a proportional outcome strikes me not necessarily as desirable, because a lot of this problem strikes me as bringing forward the disproportionalities that start in the early grades that we're seeing in the reports that you give, for instance, with MCAS disparities, that just carries forward and gets amplified. So it can't be fixed at the point of referral from 8th to 9th grade.
Yes, we agree that the point of referral is not the only fix.
But my question really was about OEE and PD.
Yeah, I would say I've spoken with previous equity directors. Claire is still quite new, right? And so we're still.
Okay, I would be really interested to know whether.
Within the working group, we actually surfaced a document that Janae had produced explicitly for this purpose about implicit bias. And so I believe strongly, and we will, as we think about this working group, that will absolutely be an important part of the work.
Thank you.
I want to make sure that we really understand what you're saying is that you're not going to have the English pilot be for everybody next year, or are we just talking about all sorts of, like, I just want to make sure that we're very clear about what you're saying. Are we going to pause and look into this further before we decide to have that pilot be for everyone?
That's something, Sarah, that we're looking for guidance from the committee, realizing that we did miss some steps and in the process. And so that's something that we are looking for guidance from the committee on. And again, we have the high school team that can answer questions about the 9th grade English pilot, but we're trying to keep the 2 topics actually separate for what was docketed and what came up in the community this week.
Just for some historical context, when the 9th grade unleveled social studies class came to be, there was a vote by the school committee in 2019. I do believe that pursuant to our policies, this is ultimately a decision to be made by the committee because it would be a course change.
I agree.
Right, and the expansion of unleveled courses is also a vote to be taken by the committee pursuant, I believe, to I2B in our curriculum development policy.
That is correct, yes.
I looked it up, Helen.
All right, any other questions? We are running quite a bit behind, but as usual, we will catch up, I assure you. We can. Questions or comments?
can we comment on what Jody asked us about?
Go right ahead.
Okay. I was very happy to be invited by Gabe to visit the high school a week ago Monday. And during the visit, we went and visited one of the unleveled pilot classrooms. And I had a really nice opportunity to speak with the teacher whose name I can't successfully pronounce, but she was wonderful. And we had a really great conversation, and we talked about the types of books, and they were books the highest level were books I'd read in the past couple of years, 2 of them, and really enjoyed those books, and they were thought-provoking, and they're complex, not to toot my own horn, but they're books for adults, they're not young adult literature.
Yeah, they're heavyweight books.
They're heavyweight books that address very complex themes. And I was so impressed. And I actually talked about, we talked about, just to give one example, the issue of how kids can really access sort of similar topics and how they sort of can talk to each other. And the example of the Odyssey was brought up, and there was 3 different Odysseys that they're reading, and there's a graphic novel version, and one that has a more modern annotation, and one that has a more traditional annotation. And so really the students can talk to each other and are learning the same things. And I just thought it was really well done, and it was really thought-provoking. With that said, I think we also have this experience of WISP and not having data, and I would love us to continue to be able to explore what the impacts of this are and how it works for educators. One of the things that I was struck by in the comments that I read this week from all the people was how the teachers feel about this, and whether the additional burden of differentiating within the same classroom is particularly significant. And I put that in my mind together with the issues we've been having around class size, and thinking, what does it mean if all of a sudden we're having 20, I'm making it up, 27 kids in an English classroom, and then we're also teaching 3 subclasses in some ways, or having to differentiate at a high level. So I would love to see the data on this. And I still would love us to go back and see what was up with WISP and get the results from that. But in general, in the same way I was asking you earlier about the data on the co-taught classrooms, I just think it's really beneficial to us as we think about all of these different ways of investing our money, in having the data to demonstrate the positive outcomes behind it. So my desire would be for a continuation of the pilot, or a pause of the pilot, so you can analyze the first year data, or however you want to proceed. But I would like us to get data first before we were to take this to the full deployment stage.
Mariah, if I can probe that a little bit, I'm curious if there are particular types of data that you would find helpful.
Yeah.
So I'm not an educational evaluator, so I don't want to speculate on that. I think I would leave that to professionals who are educational evaluators to guide me, rather than me say what I think. Thanks.
Sure.
Stephen and then Helen.
Sorry, I didn't realize when I commented before that this was the end of this topic, and we were not docketing any further discussion of deleveling. So I'll just comment to say, if I understand correctly, I'll just comment to say that it's my understanding that any expansion of a pilot course should be brought before the school committee for discussion of the results of an evaluation of the course, and voted on before the decision is made. Okay, that's my position, and I second what Mariah said as well. I just want to further add to that I'd be interested in having a discussion about the pedagogy necessary to successfully teach a multi-tracked course.
I would just also like to thank John Andrews, who's here, who accompanied me along with Brian Poon to a D-leveled English class yesterday. It was very enjoyable to see firsthand how that works, and want to thank you for that. Anyone else? Andy?
Just quickly, I think this might have been implicit in what Mariah was asking, but it would be great if, when this does come up again for the school committee, if WISP can be discussed in this connection, and it not just be confined to our experience so far with the ELA pilot. We presumably will have better data for WISP after these 4-something years.
Helen?
Thanks.
Well, I just you had asked about what things you'd want to see in terms of the data, and to me it seems we want to know how kids felt about their experience. We'd want to know where they ended up going the following year and to which level. Would they have gone there anyway or not? I mean, those are the sorts of things I think that we would want to understand. How, what does success mean? That this is a successful pilot.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Suzanne?
Did you want to say something, Anthony?
At some point, but when it's appropriate, and I can wait.
Okay, so I also thought it might be interesting and helpful to talk to teachers who have been doing this integrated, inclusive, not just on these pilots. Certainly, that would be helpful in WISP, but I believe we also have other courses where, as we were saying, students have the opportunity to decide whether they want to do like standards or honors, and what's the impact of that. So we do have some data. I don't think it's been gathered, but I think it could be, and it would certainly be helpful.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to echo something that Jody said at the beginning, and that is John is happy, I am happy, other people are happy to come as early as the 29th on a docketed item to provide as much information as we can. We have some data. The reality is we don't have as much data as would be ideal, but I think we're happy to share survey data. We're happy to share mobility data and sort of the myth of mobility that undergirds some of this or spurs some of this work. I think I would just say I've appreciated hearing the concerned emails from parents, guardians, caregivers, community members, and happy to try to, one, communicate what we are trying to do overall. I think there is some misinformation and misuse of words like deleveling that I think spur greater fear than is appropriate from my perspective. It's work I feel really, really strongly about, and I understand and respect the school committee's need to vote on a change like this. There's one other, I think the one piece that I would own from my perspective, one of the public commenters put the onus from my perspective on the school committee for not having public meetings about the reimagining ninth grade. That is for me to own as the principal of the high school and for us to own jointly with the Office of Teaching and Learning. I don't see that as a responsibility of the school committee, but rather as part of our process as we reimagine ninth grade. So I think there are pieces where our families need to be better educated to understand the why of the work that we're doing, the how of that work, as well as the effectiveness of the work so far. So just I felt the need to speak to those things based on what Carolyn Thal said. And I appreciated her comment overall, but it seemed to point at you when I think the reality is it should be pointed towards me and towards us.
Since we have Mr. Andrews here, I don't know if you wanted to comment on anything at all. Just want to give you that opportunity if you do, regarding the ELA pilot or anything else.
Hi, nice to see you all. Nice to hear this conversation. I recognize and I support the concerns about process, and I want to support the process that the school committee and the town thinks is right. I want to say that we've created a course that's amazing, and the heterogeneous, unleveled course that we've created is not an average of an honors or a non-honors course. It is a radical rethinking of pedagogy, as you're describing. It's required training that we've received from generous support from the OTL and the BEF. It is a course that the teachers are excited to teach. They were telling me today how this has been a revitalizing experience for them in their profession. A teacher who's been in the district for over 20 years is describing this as an exciting moment for her. And the student response and the surveys that we've got are strong. They're very positive about how they're building community with each other, how they're learning from each other, how they're feeling challenged. It is not perfect. It is still new. There's still stuff to work out, but it is a great course that we have built, and it would be a great course for all students, and I stand behind it very strongly, and I support whatever I can do to help make it happen for more students. So thank you.
Thank you. Suzanne?
Yeah, I just want to echo that, John. It's only been going on 5 months. So, it's new. It's brand new. And the teachers, I also was able to observe in the classroom, and the teachers working really hard to make that work. It will be easier the second and third year, I'm sure, but the first year is really challenging for the teachers. But even in 5 months, we're seeing success. And so I just want to say that, it's early to make a decision, maybe we don't have enough data points, but what we're seeing so far is encouraging, and it's enough to move forward in collecting the data points and helping us make decisions.
All right, anyone else regarding transition from 8th to 9th grade?
Wait, still on that topic, though.
Okay, go ahead.
So what is the status, though, going forward of the ELA unleveled course? Is it continuing as a pilot only? What is the current status of it?
Stephen, until we get the proper school committee approval, we will continue as a pilot.
Okay,
And-
thank you.
Yes.
I'm glad to hear it, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about it. I really appreciated how you just described it. It sounds very exciting.
Can I just ask a clarification on
Sure.
that? So currently it's 2 teachers offering 2, remind me what the.
We have 5 sections.
Okay.
2 of them have a co-teaching cohort built into them, and 2 teachers teaching 5 sections.
5 sections total. And they're in a co-taught model funded by the Innovation Fund?
No, the co-taught model, special education.
All 5 of the sections are co-taught? Sorry.
Sorry.
Sorry. And Gabe told this all to me last week.
No, it's
I just
okay.
can't process it anymore.
So we planned on 4 sections at the start of at the fall. The requests were so high that we decided to offer 5. 2 of those sections have a special ed co-teaching model built in, so there are 8 or 9 kids in that class who have co-teaching built into their IEP, so we're required by law to provide that for them. So it's 2 English teachers and 1 special ed teacher who work with 5 sections total.
Okay, so is the plan to continue, in the absence of a vote from school committee, otherwise would the pilot continue at 5 sections next year with the rest of them? Or will you offer it again to see who accepts and go based on demand?
I would encourage that we offer it and see what the demand is. And we often try to meet student requests as much as we can. So if we can staff student requests, if the requests go up to 7 classes, I'd love to offer that, but I will follow your lead because I work for the school.
Thank you.
All right, you had something you wanted to add?
I do. I just want to, I won't be here in 2 weeks, so I just want to, I'll make my public comment now. Betsy put me on the clock. I just want to, from things that we've heard tonight at the table and in public comment, especially about the data for WISP. WISP was not created to end disproportionality in the district. WISP was not created to end the achievement gap. WISP was created because of a recognized disproportionality of what was showing up in our 9th grade social studies classes when kids came in the door, and a documented failure of kids to change levels once they were in that level. So that was the observation that the social studies department made about their classes specifically. And they went about saying, how can we redo this? What can we look at to make this a different experience for kids who come into 9th grade? The response and the way that it energized our teaching staff is incredible. It's a completely different experience, and it's something that became a true team built experience that changed the way people teach social studies. It's not just 9th grade world history 1. It's a very different way entirely of looking at the history experience. It is measurable in some sense. I can look back at 2018, the year before we started WISP. I had 2 students junior year in APUSH, in advanced two African-American students in advanced placement US history in 2018. 2. This year, there's 10. This year, if I compare that with my honors classes as well, the numbers are up. We'll prepare all those numbers for the formal docketed conversation that you'll have. But that wasn't even the goal. The goal was to change the 9th grade experience and to give the teachers a way to energize it. And I think that's what John is doing with his department now. It's saying, we've been teaching 9th grade, which is the Odyssey. You roll out the Odyssey, and I don't specialize in teaching freshmen, but it can be a little it can be a little wonderful. It can be a lot wonderful. It could be wonderfuler. It could be more wonderful. And this is an opportunity that I urge you to take to push this group of very talented, very devoted ninth grade teachers into something new, into a different way of teaching. But believe me, I'm an English teacher too. And the thought in my head of like, how would you possibly differentiate this? I'm too old. I couldn't do it. I have no idea how someone's going to be able to do that. He does know, and his teachers know, and they should be given the opportunity to do that. And I'll also throw this at you. We're this year dedicating 0.7 to support that pilot, which of course we would continue next year. But if you just end the pilot, I can bring it down from 7 to 6.3. So there's some money on the table for you if you approve.
All right, anyone else? Okay, well, thank you very much for this presentation. There's certainly going to be a lot more discussion on this at upcoming meetings. We will now move on, hopefully lightning fast, to proposed revision of the PSB substance use prevention and
David,
education
I'm sorry to
policy.
harp on this, but since we had so many people of the public who really wanted to know, is there like a clear, pithy, succinct, one-sentence summary of what just happened for everyone that answers the question, are we de-leveling English next year?
So essentially, barring school committee approval, then it's not going to happen. It sounds like the pilot would continue another year. So the school committee needs to approve the change to de-leveling English for all of ninth grade. So that's a vote that we would need to take.
Yeah,
But what happens if in 3 weeks we take that vote? What are people who care about this now, like what is the future? They don't know yet.
They don't, it depends on us. So if we were to vote in favor of ending the pilot for purposes of de-leveling all of ninth grade English for next year, that's what would happen. If we vote that down, it won't happen.
Okay, but we're not making any sort of statement about that right now. It's pending. This is just putting
It is, unless somebody wanted to vote on it right now, but
Well, there's a practical piece to this, right? Because there has to be a course catalog and teachers need to know what they're teaching. So we have to have some kind of time frame by which.
And
If I
this-
could-
the eighth graders are choosing now, correct? So you need to put them into classes, and you need to have English classes.
so what would be the date by which you absolutely need to know whether it's just going to be one type of ELA class or the same options as this year? All right, so we do have a little bit of time.
Can I make a suggestion?
Go ahead.
For this year, because it's so late in the game, why not continue with the program, allow those parents who want and children who want to be in the unleveled course, be in the unleveled course. Like you said, you had more kids that signed up than you even expected. Let's see how people vote with their feet for next year. Allow both types to happen and reduce the ambiguity and get some information as to how this is working. You'll know from this year, more or less, you'll have some data for next year. So that would be my suggestion.
That is also how I'm leaning, but we didn't formally docket this, and also we might get more data coming. But how do others feel? Do you just want to decide right now, or do you want to wait a little longer?
Is Anthony pacing around the podium
Yeah,
because he has something to
Anthony,
say?
My
You can
sense
push
is-
back at me.
Well, I think you have wise perspectives and information based on the emails you've received, based on your lived experience. I think we would like an opportunity to share with you data that could be helpful in this decision-making process and a more a more robust presentation from John and me. I mean, essentially what I'm saying, I hope there's still a chance, realizing that there may not
I
be.
didn't want to, if I could be clear, I was trying to be helpful. If this is, and you're here today, I didn't want you to have to come back again, all three of you. So, but, I'm more than happy to take it back and wait and have a presentation. I know you need to make decisions.
But
That's the other
the start of students selecting classes for next year will be the first week of March.
Close at the end of the first week in March, and then that's when the students will be selecting their courses.
All right, so we do have a little bit of time.
But again, it's unfortunately it's a different process at 8 different schools. Some of those conferences are happening next few weeks. There will be a lot of redoing and resurveying of 8th grade teachers necessary if we go with that.
I think we would want to, if we come on the 29th, to know, we have some sense of concerns and questions. I just wonder whether there is a way to share. We can review all of the emails that you've received and we've received. And if there are additional questions or pieces of information that you want or need, we would like to come obviously prepared. So I don't know whether that's sharing that information with Gabe in OTL, but we would want to come with as much information as possible, given all the commitments you have.
So just as some of us are saying we would like to see data prior to making a decision on the merits of this, I think by the same token, we ought to give an opportunity to district leadership to provide data for their position. And so it sounds like we have a little more time to do this. So my recommendation would be we docket this for the meeting we have the last week of February, and we'll take a vote then after our presentation.
So the message to the public is we'll be revisiting this for a final decision at the 29th.
Correct.
29th.
But the public can rest assured somewhat that it's not going to happen without a vote by the school committee one way or the other. All right. So with that, thank you very much. And we will now move on to proposed revision of the PSB substance use prevention and education policy, fourth reading and possible vote. Betsy uploaded this afternoon the most recent version, which reflects the suggestions that have been made by Mariah and also by Ms. Park in public comment. Are there any questions regarding the policy? Would someone like to move it?
I'd like to move it. Oh,
go ahead, Helen.
Go ahead and move it.
All right, I'll second. Helen?
So I think the one question about educating students about not, I forget the line, there was one line at the end that had to do with education of students about substance abuse. And then the last line says, we will educate students not to smoke. It could be part of the education will be that it is illegal to smoke on school grounds. You know, I don't know. If you want to nitpick, if you don't, I'm okay with it.
Anyone else? So I think it basically says that it's educating students as to what does the law say. You're not supposed to be smoking on school grounds.
It's not clear, the language, but that's fine. I'm good with it.
All right. Okay, so Stephen, your vote.
yes.
Mariah.
Yes.
Suzanne.
Yes.
Andy.
Yes.
Helen.
Yes.
Sarah.
Yes.
Valerie.
Yes.
And I also vote yes. All right, I recommend we skip subcommittee and liaison reports unless someone has something burning to say.
I do, because I've had my accounts payable report ready for like 4 different
Sure.
weeks. Someone canceled it.
Go right ahead.
It's been since October. I've been ready since like the middle of December. Let me pull it up. Sorry, let me find it. Okay. The last time I reported was October 26th. Since then, I think Andy 1 week or 2 weeks have signed off on $8,863,624.07. And I was trying to come up with a good anecdote, as I like to. And I can't remember anything exciting at this point in the evening, but I'm going to come up with something good soon to share with you all, but mostly it's the usual stuff. Andy, can you think of anything exciting? I know you look like you've got something really good to share.
No, exciting things, but not suitable for anecdotal treatment.
Oh, I've got one exciting one that I just want to talk about from tonight, which is tonight I signed off on the airfare for the BHS civil rights trip, which is, I think, happening in over April break, if I'm not mistaken. And it's really wonderful to see that. And then the other one I signed off on was the part of the payment to the Costa Rica trip. And so those are big, exciting sort of signature opportunities for students at the high school that are worth highlighting among the many boxes of paper clips and other school supplies that we sign off on. So 2 big, exciting ones.
All right. Anyone else have the urge to share a subcommittee report or liaison update? Seeing none, we will move to new business. And under new business, I'd like to inform the community that last week on February 1st, school committee approved a new BHS course subject to some minor edits to the course title and description. Staff reviewed and accepted those proposed edits. The course will now be called The History and Science of Sex, Gender, and Sexuality. It can be found on pages 24 and 25 of the BHS course catalog. Is there any other new business?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We received an email from Mothers Out Front on our sustainability policy, noting that schools may request composting infrastructure from DPW, and our sustainability policy requires composting at the schools as well as communication on composting, and yet only I think 4 of our schools have done so. It's at no cost to the schools. Traditionally, it's been the principals that have made that request. Is there anything, would we have to docket a discussion of this, or can we simply motion for the school committee to enforce compliance with our policy by requesting that infrastructure at the schools? Or should we involve the principals more directly? I mean, it's at no cost. I'm not sure what the holdup is. I just want to make sure our policy is moves into effect. Linus, do you have a recommendation here? I don't want to impose upon the principals, but I do want to. Okay. Okay. I'm happy to do it that way then. Thank you.
I was confused about the email and about the response we got, because I've been in schools and seen them composting that weren't on the list. So I don't know if this was something we stopped during COVID and maybe didn't restart, but I feel like things are probably, maybe if they're in a hiatus or a hibernation, I'm sure that the will has been there and will be there again, and maybe it's just a temporary pause that's been challenging given all the staffing things to really get going again. But anyways, I've seen it happening in schools, so I was surprised.
All right, so I'm going to move that we go into executive session pursuant to Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, for the following purposes. Purpose 3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining with the Brookline Educators Union, Unit A, and Paraprofessional Unit, if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining and litigating position of the public body, and the chair so declares. And purpose 7, to review and approve executive session minutes from the following meeting, February 1st, 2024. Is there a second?
Yes.
Stephen seconds. Stephen, your vote?
Yes.
Mariah?
Yeah.
Suzanne?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Helen?
Yes.
Sarah?
Yes.
Valerie?
Yes.
And I also vote yes, and we will not be returning to open session. So good night, everyone.